$2.5 million in new wage theft claims filed with California's labor commissioner. Warehouse worker Anthony Valecio says that striking workers will present a petition to the bosses and come back to work with community support to end their strike on Monday.
We will give them a petition signed by all the co-workers that we are going back to work. They are supposed to let us back in by law. And not only that, we are going to have support from the community, other organizing members from other organizations, as well as the Teamsters. And we are going to push to make sure everybody goes back to work right away.
Valecio says the warehouse workers' struggle at the ports is for a living wage, decent working conditions, and the right to form a union. He says working conditions inside the warehouses need to be improved along with the wages.
We working our butts off holidays. They want you constantly just breaking your back for them. Started to implement a heat break, which they've been trying to deny us. We've been taking it little by little, but they've been giving hassles about it, writing up and intimidating us. Not only that, it's unsafe. There's some areas where it's really unsanitary. Our lunch breaks where we have to eat, it's right next to our containers, right next to the forklifts where all the smoke. It's just horrible, to tell you the truth. We're infested with rats as well as roaches.
Drivers at XPO Logistics, Intermodal Bridge Transport, and Gold Point Transportation have ended their strikes. Pacific 9 transportation drivers remain on strike indefinitely. According to a group called GPAC, part of Chicago's gun violence problem is the availability of guns bought by straw buyers who make gun buys at suburban dealers and then give the guns to criminals. GPAC is an organization formed to counter the influence of the gun lobby in Illinois. The group filed suit to try to get suburban dealers to crack down on straw purchases. GPAC Executive Director Kathleen Stancis says the suit resulted in one of the communities, the Village of Lyons, passing an ordinance to crack down on the straw buys.
GPAC's focus is really getting illegal guns off the streets. We don't look at this as a violation of the Second Amendment. This is simply keeping guns away from criminals. We have, since our inception 2 years ago, put together a coalition of 50 policymakers up and down the state that we have endorsed who already are committed to enacting this kind of public safety regulation that will protect our families and communities.
For more information on GPAC, go to gpacillinois.com.
Brought to you by the IBEW, 750,000 men and women powering the way for an American comeback. Information on how to become an International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers Power Professional is online at ibew.org.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!"
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I could drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead, make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks for being here today on the big program. Lots of things to get to, lots to talk about, especially about tomorrow. Tomorrow, the big day, historic election. Make sure it's on the calendar. Whenever, I got to be honest, I don't know what it takes to get people to get out and vote. I've told friends, hey, tomorrow's voting day, and they're like, so wrapping something around your finger to remind you, I don't know if it's going to help. But tomorrow, historic day here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. It is. This is one of those, if you needed something a little extra, I know people, they get all excited about presidential years. because it happens once every 4 years, and it's the presidential thing, and there's a lot of appeal, a lot of glitz, a lot of glamour, all of that stuff. This could bring that historic first time in our state's history as a part of this nation that we will be appointing and putting 3 people on the Supreme Court. It's one of those things probably never going to happen. Well, I can probably guess not going to happen in most of our lifetime. Most of our lifetimes, we're probably not going to get to that. But maybe not for another 300 years. So pretty important stuff. And I would say, an opportunity to go, I voted in that. Probably not a bad idea. And hopefully folks will get out tomorrow. I'm personally, as someone who observes these things and tries to pay attention, expecting a very low turnout. But I'm hoping to be pleasantly surprised. I'm hoping that people see the significance of this like I do and go, oh yeah, vote. Yeah. Tomorrow. I got it on the calendar, and get out and participate. And then you can complain all you want. I mean, that's the great thing about voting. You could say my guy's not in there, so I can complain. If your guy's in there, it's kind of hard to complain, which means maybe you should have voted for somebody else in the primary. But here we are at the end of the road. And I found it interesting. And this is one of those things where you go, is this really a story, or is this just something to hit the hornet's nest with? Something to poke, the hornet's nest with a stick with? I generally like John Mysick. He comes on the program, talks with us occasionally. He is the opinion guy over at Penn Live, the Patriot News here in Harrisburg. And occasionally comes on. We invite him on to talk about whatever it is he's thrown out. And today I was going to, but I got to be honest, this isn't going to really hold my attention long. But it is one of those things where you go, wait a minute. You're busting the governor's shoes for sending out a letter supporting candidates that he believes in, really? And that's what it was. The big story this morning from the folks over at Penn Live was confused? Don't worry, Governor Tom Wolf knows who you should vote for on election day. And I'm going, of course he's going to advocate for people that he likes. Of course he's going, and Governor Corbett didn't. And every politician from the beginning of time hasn't. I mean, this is not a story, but I took like 10 minutes to look at the comments, which again, I know better. It's one of those things, better. Don't feed the trolls. But that's what it was really, this article was about. It's about, stirring up the hornet's nest and getting the trolls all worked up in their panties all in a bunch. And, look, I understand we're more than 100 days out from a budget. We have a lot of things to do. The governor is saying, hey, we should get people on the court that support working families, that are going to uphold the law in the best way that he sees fit, going to interpret legislation coming out of the General Assembly. And I understand how important the Supreme Court is. With a much more conservative court, we end up with that voter suppression law that Mike Turzai was so gleefully telling donors that they had passed, with the sole intention of holding down the vote so Mitt Romney could win as president, so that he could win Pennsylvania. That was it. And everyone knew that. Because if you remember back during the trial before the court, the Commonwealth actually stipulated that the law that was passed would have never caught anyone. They had never found anyone guilty of the crime of doing what the law had solved. They had never known of any cases where this would have stopped the law. The law would have stopped those deviants and criminals from voting as other people. No, they never saw that. But this election, this law was going to do it. And to me, it's just one of those things that makes you go, maybe this court thing's kind of important. I'll tell you another reason that this court is so very important. You remember Act 13? The Republican legislature passed it right on through, handed it off to Governor Corbett. Corbett signed it right into law. Lickety split and quick. And what it did is it gave the drilling industry really everything they wanted. It was the biggest of wet dreams. It was a big sloppy one. Wow. And all of that balled up into one big ball of wax. Took local control away, basically said, we'll drill where we want, when we want it. You'll say nothing about it. And it also did a whole bunch of other things. Made it that it was only, if there was a spill, you only had to report it to the municipality's water systems, not to everybody who owned a well or would be affected by it. It prevented physicians from being told what was on the patients and what they might be exposed to without signing a blood oath of never saying what it could possibly be ever. And also it gave, basically eminent domain rights to these drillers that, we talk about local control, not so much. And it basically said, here, take it all. Drillers, please, drillers, take it all. And the court said, you know what? Hold on. Hold the phone. The part that says you can't have any local zoning laws and that there's no local control, that's kind of unconstitutional. Not going to allow that to happen. Now we find out that the Supreme Court is going to hear the other part of that, which is, let's say you own a well in an area where there's a spill. Should the drilling companies have to tell you, or do you have to figure that out from yourself with the, when you turn the tap on and it just catches on fire? Is that how you have to find out? Should there be a notice in your box? Hey, we spilled some stuff and it might affect your well, and you might be drinking all this stuff. So, if you do, just be careful. Just kind of a thought. Also, should we be taking the gag rule off of our physicians and let them know what it is that they and their patients are being exposed to or have been exposed to, so that we can get the best medical treatment possible, instead of going, well, doc, we'd love to tell you what rings of benzene we're dealing with, but it's proprietary. We don't want our competition to know. And they're probably all using the exact same thing made by one company. But we're not allowed to know that because it's proprietary. We don't want the other guy knowing we're using the exact same stuff they are. That's how crazy this stuff gets sometimes. And also this idea that, we're going to put a pipeline right up your, because we have eminent domain rights. That's going to be heard going forward. And there's a lot of this stuff that you go, the courts are important. And this is what the right wing has figured out masterfully, which is why they're spending tons of money on one candidate who's the bar association going, no, not her, anybody but her. Not recommended. How bad do you have to be for the bar association to say, no, sorry, not you? I mean, I didn't even know that actually happened. But we've got a Republican Supreme Court nominee who they've said, no, not going to happen. Not you. And that will be interesting to find out how that works out. But this is why the court's so important. And why I think the vetting process so important, that we talk about the candidates, we talk about the people who, they've spent their lives, fighting and hearing cases and making the right decisions. I had someone the other day say, well, we shouldn't be voting on these. We shouldn't make judges political. Understand, it's always going to be political. Tell me that the nominating process is not political. Tell me what happens on the federal level is not political. It is. It's absolutely political. And I've always been of the mindset, I don't believe we take from the power of we the people, the power of the voter. So tomorrow, and this is why, again, I'm going to stress this throughout the day. Tomorrow's a huge day. There are 13 hours tomorrow to find 5 minutes to go in and make your choices. 13 hours. That's it. Get there on the way to work, on the way from work, take lunch break, whatever. We're going to wake up bright and early, take the kids with us to go and vote, because we always take our kids, because we want to instill that, you got to go vote mentality in their heads. So please put it on the calendar, ring around the finger, tattoo it across your eyelids. I don't care. That's what you got to do tomorrow. Got to get out and vote. If you don't vote, I don't want to hear a word. Not a word from you. Nothing. Got it? Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1928. That was the day that police shot at protesting union workers at Prince's Pier in Melbourne, Australia. 3 union workers were injured, 1 fatally. Each day, the workers on the wharf had to muster or gather and hope to be picked for a job by one of the shipping companies. The practice often led to corruption and inconsistent work for the men. The Waterside Workers' Federation Union sought an end to the hiring method. The union had been formed in 1901 to represent workers on the waterfront in response to the dangerous and often brutal working conditions workers toiled under. The ship companies were determined to undermine the union's influence. They had the support of conservative Prime Minister Stanley Bruce. And on this fateful day, armed police brought in non-union workers to Prince's Pier. 1,000 union workers lined the docks to protest against this scab labor. Skirmishes broke out between the police and union workers. The police fired into the crowd. One of those bullets found the neck of Australian World War I veteran Alan Whitaker. Whitaker, like many men, had returned to Australia after the war, seeking work on the docks. It took 3 excruciating months for Whitaker to die from his wound. The shooting was declared justified. In 2010, a group of local historians and union members organized to look further into the case. An article published in the Sydney Morning Herald under the headline, "The Truth Was the First Casualty of the 1928 War on the Waterfront." It concluded the original investigation had been a whitewash. Whitaker's story, like those of workers who died fighting for dignity at the workplace, is up to us to uncover, pass on, and remember. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm Eric Woostwald. During the CNBC Republican presidential debate, moderator John Harwood noted that Senator Marco Rubio's tax reform plan disproportionately favors the rich over the middle class. After the debate, right-wing media figures attacked Harwood for his assertion. Here's Fox and Friends co-host Steve Doocy.
There was another example of media bias, and that is with the chief inquisitor last night, John Harwood, on the question regarding your tax plan. He flat out apparently lied about it.
Fox host Megyn Kelly also defended Rubio.
Rubio was going to let it slide, Chris. He had said, look, that's not right. He was going to let it slide and go on. Harwood interrupted him and said, no, Tax Foundation says it my way. And then Rubio says, no.
But Harwood's claim was correct. Factcheck.org showed that Rubio's plan gives more to the top 1% of earners. Bloomberg reported that Rubio's tax plan, quote, gives larger benefits to the richest Americans than to the middle class. And a Tax Foundation analysis showed that the plan could add $6 trillion to the national debt. For more on this and other stories, please visit MediaMatters.org.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME. We make Pennsylvania happen!
Voter ID, which is going to allow Governor Romney to win the state of Pennsylvania. Done.
I've been taking care of business every day. Taking care of business every way. I've been taking care of
I'm going to tell you, I listen to Turzai now. I listen to that quote, and imagine had that voter suppression law been allowed to stand. Imagine if that had not been ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. Think about the limitations for the upcoming election. I mean, stop and think about how important the court is to our everyday lives. And I know a lot of people say, this isn't the big sexy election like the presidential one. This one's huge. Anyway, here to talk a little bit about the Get Out the Vote effort for tomorrow's big election. I've asked Dave Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, to come talk with us. Dave, thanks for taking time for us.
My pleasure. Glad to be on.
So, I go back to that, like a Turzai's thing, voter ID done so that Romney can win, not because it's right, not because of it would stop massive fraud, but because Romney would win. I think about that moment. That's why tomorrow is so important.
Not only that, but if you recall way back when Corbett was governor, I mean, even the Secretary of State admitted there was zero cases of fraud in Pennsylvania. But, this was part of that national trend that was suppressing primarily minority voters and students and seniors. And thank God here in Pennsylvania, we didn't acquiesce to that. So, but yes, tomorrow is such an important day with elections, and you framed it correctly. It's not the real sexy kind of governors. Yes, we have a mayor election in Philadelphia. But unfortunately or fortunately, it's mostly done in the primary because of the overwhelming Democrat reaction or registration. But this is the first time Pennsylvania has the oldest state Supreme Court in the United States. This is the first time in 311 years that there are 3 vacancies on the Supreme Court. And your intro was accurate how important these elections are. And I'll give you a great example, and it's very apropos for right now. We're only one of 2 states that doesn't have a budget in place right now, us and Illinois. And if you recall, back in 2007, 2008, we had a budget issue impasse. Governor Rendell was the governor, and he decided that he didn't have the authority to pay the employees. So my members, state employees, all went without pay for weeks on end. And it finally got resolved in the courts where they said, no, regardless of your budget issues, these folks came to work. These folks did a job. And under the Fair Labor Standards Act, you're supposed to pay them. So thankfully today, all the state employees are being compensated for their work, and they're not being out in the middle as a hostage of the budget situation. And that's just one example of the courts that could affect our daily lives.
Yeah, but you can go through hundreds of things and examples of the court going one way or the other. And I look at the national level in the federal Supreme Court and some of the just atrocious decisions that have come down, Citizens United, and the one a case that I guess is going to be heard this coming spring that could be just devastating to workers across this country. And this Friedrichs case that could impose national right to work law.
That's exactly right. We had a preview of this a couple of years ago in a case called Harris versus Quinn. It had to deal with home health care workers. We have them in Pennsylvania, but this came out of Illinois. A home health care worker is a contracted employee in a sense, either by a private firm or by the state itself. And they go in and help elderly parents, mostly disabled citizens, and they get a stipend for doing light housekeeping and taking care of personal effects with those clients. But there was a woman by the name of Harris, and she was a home health care worker. Governor Quinn, then the governor of Illinois, signed an executive order giving not only recognition to a union for the home health care workers, but also putting in place fair share fees, agency fees, which means you don't have to join the union, but you're going to pay us for the services we provide because we have to negotiate your contract, we have to represent you in grievance and legal hearings, working conditions, etc. It went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled 2 things. One, that the home health care workers are quasi-public sector employees. They weren't really employees of the Commonwealth or the state. And 2, that the fair share fee deductions were illegal, unconstitutional. And they implemented the decision that said they have to cease. Now, it's not to cease next year. It wasn't cease a month. It ceased immediately. And we had some very large locals actually out of California that lost a significant amount of money because they stopped the fair share fees. Leading up to what you just said, there's a Fredericks versus the California Education Association. And the decision has to do with what's called the Abood decision. This was back in the 1970s, that the unanimous Supreme Court then ruled that agency fee and fair share are constitutional for public sector employees. So in light of what the national trend is, in light of what the Harris versus Quinn went south on the unions for that. And, you know, we've got the Citizens United, as you said, that, you know, gave a carte blanche to the corporations to put as much money as they want in as possible. If this decision in the spring does go south on us, corporations will dump money in. We'll be just struggling for getting finances together just to keep our operations going.
And what we're seeing is, you know, I remember John Roberts, the Chief Justice of the federal Supreme Court, saying, you know, balls and strikes. So he believes in stare decisis, decided law. What we're seeing are activist judges and activist courts really upending the entire 20th century.
Exactly. And, you know, who would have thought, you know, most of the time we've been dealing with the legislature and bad laws and governors signing bad legislation and the frustration of the United States Supreme Court, or any court does that matter. There's nothing you can do about it. You can't call your legislator, can't call your governor, your president, you can't send an email. I mean, we are just beholden to how they come up with these decisions. So just as an aside, we saw this coming about a year ago, that this was going through its courses, and we decided, AFSCME International, to get into a program of reaching out not only to the fair share folks and get them to be full members and explain the benefits of having us all together in this venture, but also to reassess our members to make sure they are aware of the problems that we're going to be running up against if we don't get a favorable ruling in this Friedrichs versus the CEA. So we put in what's called AFSCME Strong. It's a program of actually going out to every 65,000 of AFSCME Council 13, 65,000 members and fair share folks that we represent, and having a conversation one-on-one. We almost got up to 10,000 so far, and this just happened a couple of months ago. We've trained a lot of activists to go out there. So we're into our operation. Yeah, we got 50-some thousand folks to go after, but we're moving along as best as we can and explaining the importance of them making contributions voluntarily for the political action campaigns that are so important to get the right legislatures in that. So we're not just going to sit on our hands and wait for this decision. We're very proactive this time. We've signed up nationwide thousands and thousands of fair share folks, and hopefully the trend will continue.
And the hope is that out of this, regardless of what happens in the spring, you have a more activist, more militant labor movement, because I think that's what's been missing for the last 20 years, that militancy that my grandparents' generation most certainly had.
Exactly. And if we are successful, even halfway successful in our campaign, we'll be even stronger than we were before. We'll have members that are more aware of what's going on and the challenges that are going after, especially in the public sector. We know our brothers and sisters in the private sector have been getting knocked around with bankruptcies and firms going overseas. So it was just a matter of time that we came into the firing range, and that's what's happening now. But we're not just going to, again, sit back and let it happen and just wring our hands. We're going after it full blast and making sure we get our members involved and get more educated as the political process, the judicial process, the executive branch process, so they clearly understand and hopefully hold their elected officials accountable.
Good, all good stuff. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're with Dave Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13. But, you know, I want to bring this back to tomorrow's election, Dave. And tomorrow, huge, you know, while we can talk about all the craziness that's gone on the federal Supreme Court, with the ideologues that have really taken that court to the radical right. Here in Pennsylvania, we've got the opportunity to, as you pointed out, to put 3 people on that court who are sane, rational, and may actually have the interests of average, everyday working people, may have that at heart first.
We do. We have 3 good candidates, Christine Donahue, Kevin Doherty, and David Weck, who all have excellent credentials when it comes to not just organized labor, but working folk in general. I mean, that's the most important part about this whole thing is, you know, we in the labor movement not only, you know, do a job representing our members, protecting our members, negotiating contracts for members, but a lot of times we're going into battles that really help the everyday working folk. If it's keeping Social Security, if it's raising the minimum wage, if it's hanging on to workers' compensation, unemployment compensation. Those are things we do because it's all intertwined in our social programs, including some of the civil rights programs that we get involved with. And it has, some of these battles have helped coalesce us with a lot of folks that are out there that have been doing the same battles, maybe with a different spin to it, but we're on the same thing. So yes, the election is so important. These judges are so important. And finally, the issue comes with gerrymandering, with these districts that are so out of whack, leaning towards the majority party, whoever that may be, the Republicans or the Democrats, and some of them are horribly, horribly drawn. We want to bring some fairness to that process.
I keep showing everyone the 30th senatorial district, my district, and again, I'll send it back out on Twitter so people can take a look at it. It's quite comical to see the Calvin action figure having gas coming out the back end, because I live in the gas cloud of Calvin. Thank you to the gerrymandering pen of our legislature. But to kind of just to bring this back, because why it's so important, and I look at where we started. Mike Turzai saying, voter ID done so Mitt Romney can be president. Tomorrow's that day where we say, you know what? We want a Supreme Court who's going to continue to protect that ultimate right to exercise our right to the franchise.
Exactly. And if some of the polling is indicative, the folks are taking notice. Folks are looking at who is going up for these things. We've got judges, the ones I named, are very highly qualified from the Bar Association. So we're hoping that it goes the right way, and not goes the right way for labor, but goes the right way for working folks, because we need friends in the court.
Last question I've got for you. Tomorrow is going to be like any voting day. There are going to be a couple of snafus, maybe some problems. If someone has a problem voting, any suggestions on how to deal with that?
Well, I know there's in Philadelphia, I think it's a 1776 program, and that's not the local. That's the voters' rights issues. I don't know the numbers for that. And Rick, if you find them, it'd be great if you tweet or post it on your website. Yeah, there's hopefully it looks like it's going to be a nice day all across the state, which is very, very important, especially for Democrat voters. Hopefully Philadelphia turns out very well. Hopefully there's no snafus down there, and we can hopefully celebrate on Tuesday night.
One of the sites that I found, votespa.com. We'll make sure we get links for if people do have problems, easy, simple to find, so we can solve them, make sure that everyone has the right to vote. Dave, I appreciate you taking a little time for us. Thanks so much.
Thanks for the work, Rick. See you.
Great talking with you, David Philman, Executive Director, AFSCME Council 13. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Listening to The Rick Smith Show.
That's the way we deal with global warming, climate change, or any of those problems. Not through government intervention, not through government taxes.
Government can't wave a magic wand and make that happen. Let the private sector do this.
Republicans pan government action on climate and energy at their third presidential debate.
Special GNR coverage straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Governor Pataki, you've indicated you believe climate change is real and caused at least in part by human activity.
He's a witch. Burn him. This is your Green News Report.
Witch!
Okay, Desi Doyen, is it just my imagination, or are we actually seeing more conversation about climate change coming out in Republican presidential debates? And not to scoff at it, but to actually discuss what to do about it.
Well, it's a start. They don't really talk much about policy, but at least they're not as aggressively denying the science.
Former New York Governor George Pataki came out and actually excoriated the party, said that, yes, climate change is real. He's mad at Republicans for not understanding that. That's a start. Have I set the bar too low?
I believe you have, but hey, that's kind of where we are with today's Republican Party.
Plus, he was in the undercard kiddie table debate, so no one really saw that. So there's that.
Yes, at the third Republican presidential primary debate, both the main and the junior debate in Boulder, Colorado on Wednesday, debate host CNBC said they were going to focus on economic issues. And although one of the fastest growing sectors of the economy is clean energy, CNBC only briefly mentioned energy and climate change. In the so-called undercard debate, as you mentioned, former New York Governor George Pataki broke ranks and criticized the anti-science stance of most of his party.
One of the things that troubles me about the Republican Party is too often we question science that everyone accepts. I want Republicans to embrace innovation and technology. We could have far more clean energy. We can have next generation nuclear, thorium reactors that have no risk of meltdown. We can have solar panels on every home, R&D credits, let the private sector do this. We can export those technologies to places like China.
Now, Pataki was the only one to discuss really any kind of policy or expansion of clean energy. He echoes the policies of Democratic presidential candidates about accelerating clean energy investment and exporting that technology to the rest of the world, but he didn't have any real solutions for actually reducing emissions that cause climate change.
Yeah, there was some question about what will you do about climate change, and then they go on to talk about how we have to have as much energy as possible and never actually talk about reducing carbon emissions. New Jersey Governor Chris Christie in the main debate offered a similar take.
We've laid out a national energy plan that says that we should invest in all types of energy. We need to make sure that we do everything we can across all kinds of energy. Natural gas, oil, absolutely. But also where it's affordable, solar, wind in Iowa has become very affordable and it makes sense. That's the way we deal with global warming, climate change, or any of those problems. Not through government intervention, not through government taxes.
Yes, well, wind in Iowa has become very affordable thanks to government tax credits. Not sure how more development of oil helps climate change.
That's right, it doesn't. Now, notice that Pataki and the other candidates advocate waiting for the private sector to get around to this. But the fact is that government research funding has been the main driver behind pretty much all tech innovation, from the internet to cell phones to fracking.
To oil and coal production for decades.
Exactly. And although he criticized the role of government policy, Governor Chris Christie took credit for New Jersey ranking third in the nation for solar installations. That's correct, but it wasn't a private sector miracle. That was thanks to government policies put in place by previous administrations.
Exactly. He actually pulled out of a regional greenhouse gas initiative. So it's fun that he's taking credit for what he didn't do.
And also note that for some reason, the other candidates kept completely silent and did not jump in to add their 2 cents for this.
Go figure.
No discussion of the UN climate talks either, which the next president will have to deal with. So we got basically the same Republican Party talking points, more oil and gas drilling, and no matter what their position on climate change, all of the Republican presidential candidates all agree we should make sure the government does nothing on climate. And although this CNBC debate was focused on economic issues, another thing CNBC did not cover was that this week, more major corporations have signed on to climate action. The White House announced on Monday that 81 more big corporations have signed on to support President Obama's Clean Power Plan.
So corporations, the private sector, is coming on board with what Barack Obama is doing. This debate on CNBC was supposedly about your money, your economy. Nobody talked about that. No questions were raised about that. The economy goes on. The fight against climate change goes on, as if it never occurred in the Republican Party and even on CNBC.
Yep.
For much more on our coverage today and the stories we couldn't get to, thanks to the Republicans and their debate and CNBC, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Sounds of silence.
I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections, quite candidly, goes up as the voting populace goes down.
The billionaires don't want you to vote this year. We'll send you a message that's loud and clear that the vote.
I gotta tell you, that quote right there, 1980. the guy who's the co-founder of the Heritage Foundation, to tell you how long these plans. This is where the right does a much, much better job than the left. This is where corporate special interests do much better than working people, because they've got the long haul in mind. They know in 30, 40, 50 years, 100 years, their corporations, their corporate people will still be alive and thriving. And down the road, they're thinking, how do we get back all of that stuff that we lost because of the Great Depression? How do we undo all of the entire 20th century, all of the progressive era, all of the New Deal, the Great Society? How do we undo all of those things that help working people and get them back to good old-fashioned desperation? And one of them, quite candidly, convincing us not to vote. I mean, it just blows my mind that all around the world, and we hear stories about this all the time, all around the world, you've got people who are dying to vote. You've got people who are risking their lives to be able to cast that ballot. I still remember, and you go to the Bush Presidential Library where we made a stop along our People's Tour, and there's a picture in there, of the famous picture of the woman in Iraq who had the ink on her finger, and she was holding it up proudly for the world to see that she voted. And I got to tell you, I've run into a bunch of people going, election, really? Another one? Now? Do we have to? I mean, it's kind of like getting my kids to clean their rooms with some people. The one thing that rich people understand, though, that power to vote. And, leveraging their numbers. And I find it interesting that that Paul Weyrich there, that guy who co-founded the Heritage Foundation, talking to 20,000 Baptist ministers, organizing the churches so that you go, when you go back to the pulpit, you go and you tell them, vote on the gay marriage, vote on the abortion. Don't worry about the economic stuff. No. Over here, stupid. And that's really where we've been, over here, stupid, while they're robbing us blind and destroying an economy that built millions of good-paying, honest, hard-working jobs and moved them overseas and made them desperation jobs again. Understand, the steel mill jobs were not good jobs 100 years ago. Understand, the manufacturing jobs, truck driving, carpenters, those were not good-paying jobs. You know what made them good-paying jobs? Unions. Simple. Collective bargaining. And, call it what you want. I mean, we may need a new term. It seems that none of the old stuff can keep the name, so let's change the name to something else. I don't care what you call it, but the concept of collectively bargaining for better wages, hours, and conditions never goes out of date. And when you are standing alone, what's that saying? The weakest power on earth is the power of one. Until we figure out that when we stick together, we actually can make things better, I think we got trouble. And that's one of the things that bothers me with these elections, because they tell us, no, don't worry about it. Your vote doesn't matter. Reminds me of my high school government teacher who said, don't bother voting. Stay home. Make my vote that much stronger. Echoing exactly what Weyrich was saying. So I'm telling you, don't let them win. If for no other reason you go out to vote just to tick off people like Weyrich and the Turzais and all of the people who wanted to limit your ability to vote. And, the polling is very interesting on who votes. By socioeconomic class, the wealthier you are, the more likely you are to vote. The poorer you are, the more likely you're not going to vote. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, you've been told that you've been beaten into this submission, into thinking, well, it's hopeless. There's nothing I can do. But two, the other part of this is, time. We do it on a Tuesday, 13 hours on a Tuesday, and that's it. I say if you really wanted everyone to vote, you start on Friday, you work your way through the weekend, and by Tuesday, everybody should have had at least a chance. But tomorrow, big day, I highly suggest get out, participate in the democratic process, and vote. First time in 311 years, you're going to get the opportunity that we have here in Pennsylvania tomorrow. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Take the bastards down.
If you're a presidential aspirant and you have to tell people you're a person of integrity, chances are you're not. These odds get worse if you have to hire someone to attest to your honor. How intriguing, then, that a spokeswoman for the Bush campaign was recently trotted out to tell us that, quote, Jeb's record is one of integrity. Her testimonial was necessitated by the still evolving news story that after leaving the Florida governorship in 2007, he immediately cashed in on his name and state government contacts. Bush III became a richly paid legislative consultant and board member to major corporations that had received lucrative benefits from Florida's government while he was at the helm of it. With cynical chutzpah, Jeb, the presidential wannabe, now campaigns as an ethics reformer, piously preaching against the corrupt coziness between moneyed interests and government officials. But in the last 8 years, Preacher Bush has pocketed at least $18 million in personal payment from his own quiet spends through the revolving door of government corporate corruption. Only 4 months out of office, for example, Jeb got a nice sinecure as a board member of the insurance giant Tenet Healthcare, which ran several of Florida's private hospitals under the state Medicare program. In 2006, Tenet was found to have cheated patients and taxpayers with more than $1 billion in overcharges. To settle this malfeasance, the corporation paid only $7 million. Meanwhile, Tenet recently gushed that it has benefited greatly from Mr. Bush's, quote, extensive background in government service and his perspectives on public policy and social issues. In heartfelt gratitude, during the past 8 years, this one corporation alone has put more than $2 million in Bush's pocket. This is Jim Hightower saying, can the guy even spell INTEGRITY? Integrity?
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
It's evening rush hour in Belgrade, Serbia, and in a city park, over 100 young Afghan men linger on the grass in groups. Several others play a casual game of volleyball. But at 9 p.m., they'll all be gone when buses leave Belgrade for the Croatian border.
At this point of time, it is a pure transit. And most of them, they actually leave the same day when they arrived.
Irina Vojakova Solarano is the UN's resident coordinator in Serbia. The vast majority of asylum seekers spend just 3 days here at most, but their numbers are as staggering as the pace of their movement. Earlier this year, Serbia was receiving only 500 people a month.
Now we have, 7,000 people a day.
Among those waiting for the bus, most have been on the road from Afghanistan for more than 2 months, and aggressive policing, extortion, and a maze of bureaucracy in Bulgaria only heightened the urge to move quickly.
What most of the people need here now, they need shoes. They're always afraid that the one that they have will fall apart and what they will do next.
Vladimir Pocha is the volunteer coordinator at the Asylum Info Center in Belgrade. His volunteers fan out by the hour to city parks and inform new arrivals about the services available to them. Pocha, like many of the volunteers, is a student of psychology, and while even 3 days is too little time to begin sorting through the traumas many asylum seekers have faced, he thinks some added sensitivity and social skills, a little persistence even, go a long way in offering effective support.
I'm good. That's the answer that most of the people give us at first contact. But then after we offer something, it clicks that they can get something here. Because if we ask them what they need, they sort of think that they're making a problem if they ask for something.
In Belgrade, Serbia today and Croatia tomorrow, I'm Luke Vargas with the Talk Radio News Service.
The most important issues of the day. This is the Rick Smith Show.
Back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, ricksmithshow.com. So from Austria to Slovenia, Croatia to Bosnia, Herzegovina to Serbia, all around and all back and forth, following the patterns of the migrants. Luke Vargas on the line right out. Wow, I got to tell you, Luke, lots of passport stamps, I imagine.
Yeah, it's the best return per dollar. I feel like I've spent $1,000 to get one stamp before, and now you rent a car in the Balkans and you can tick off 5 or 6 on a day without losing your mind. It's pretty cool.
I'll tell you, I'm kind of envious. Every time I talk to you, you're somewhere else, and you must have more frequent flyer miles than anybody.
Maybe it's being a millennial, but I don't think I've ever submitted a frequent flyer number on any of my bookings before. So I'm just as you might as well be sitting on the couch, I guess, as far as airline loyalty goes.
Not a good capitalist you are, huh? All right, so tell me what's going
No.
on. What's going on in the region? What takes you there? What are you seeing?
Well, I think we all are aware of this story of mass migration, the movement of basically about 1 million people by the time the year ends. This is about a year, in 1 year, 1 million people, and maybe about 500 or 600 that year. A growing use of this part of Europe to try and transit between North Africa and the Middle East and the countries that everyone wants to go to, Germany, Austria, and Scandinavia. Basically, there are a few reasons why the Balkan countries, so we're talking about Serbia, Croatia, Slovenia at the moment, that these countries are receiving everybody. The first is that Mediterranean route, and I'm glad it's not being used as much because we know how deadly it is being policed now by the European Union. So that's sort of encouraging people not to take that route. And the other is that sort of a shorter route over the water between Turkey and Greece has become very popular. It may be short, but it is still deadly. We heard about 60 people dying on that route 2 hours over the weekend, and it's where that photo of the child in the sand was taken. So again, it's not crossing the full breadth of the Mediterranean, but it's still dangerous. And from there, refugees go basically through Greece to Albania, Macedonia, and then they arrive here. And up until a few weeks ago, they were going in all different directions once they reached there. But Hungary has been working on a border fence for over a year, and they finally completed it much sooner than expected and sealed their border. So now the path is basically solidified, and link of countries is, I would say, about 90% of new arrivals have these tiny Balkans countries that weren't getting anybody last year or even 6 months ago that are now at the very center of this and receiving about 8,000 people a day on their borders.
Wow. And these are countries that I don't know that can absorb that kind of influx, given the fact that I don't know that they're all that stable themselves.
Varying degrees. I mean, there are Albanian refugees among those who are fleeing, and Albania is one of the transit countries here. So that speaks to your point about them not really being ideal recipients. But they don't pretend to be recipients either. What you've seen over the last few weeks, as these numbers get higher and higher, is these countries basically working to move people through as quick as possible. So in the case of Croatia, for example, you are seeing about 8,000 people arrive at their border every day and 8,000 people leaving. The Croatian government said, look, they've only received, get this, 100 applications for asylum. That's not because they're saying people can't apply for asylum in Croatia. It's because nobody wants to. They realize that the social system isn't good there.
Yeah, nobody wants to go there. So where are they heading? I mean, because it sounds like everyone's going, yeah, let's move them along, get them through as fast as we can to go somewhere else. Where are they going?
Yeah, so Croatia dumps on the Slovenian border. Slovenia picks up at 8,000. Austria is sort of the first country in this chain where people like to go. That's important. The Austrians are saying basically we need to be in the category of countries in Europe now that is not being penalized, but is being rewarded, that we are getting it's just such an influx of people that we need or need to demand that the European Union force other countries to communicate with us. And rightfully so, they're telling the Slovenians, you need to give us a sense of how many people are arriving on your border every day so that we can prepare. Because the Austrians don't have that luxury of just being able to pick up 8,000, put them on buses, and drop 8,000 off at border, because no one wants to do that. They want to actually stay. They want to go to the major cities and to linger about. So the concerns are very different. Putting up a few cots at a transit camp where people will take a short nap or get a piece of bread. They need medical assistance. This is the reality of this route, is that people are in such a rush to move along that they're postponing receiving much needed medical care. They'd say they're postponing sleep. You have exhausted people who are sick, but they do not want to seek treatment anywhere along the route, even if it's being offered to them, because they want to get to their final destination. There's just such this fear that borders are going to close if they don't rush to the next destination. But that obviously means that the services that they need at their final destination are going to be all the more intense.
Right. But, at some point I understand that, because eventually the Austrians have got to go, enough. We can only take so many, right?
Absolutely. We're all sort of waiting for when reality is going to hit in the European Union. There is some semblance of these countries beginning to realize this isn't just going away. And I think they're actually sort of feeling the blowback of having such an efficient strategy, which is that when people know if you can get to Serbia, then that government will take care of you and move you to the next country, and the next country will do the same. But this route is becoming faster, safer, cheaper. It's basically just economies of scale here. So more people are taking it. Now, it's not the same, it's incentivizing people to flee their countries. I think there are many reasons, the people I've talked to, about 40 or 50 of them, they all really, I can understand why they're leaving. But the reality is their trip is getting a little bit more easy. Again, is the wrong word, but it's making people want to keep coming, regardless of whether there's any capacity to receive. So we're waiting for the wake-up call. I know, departing in just a second here, but I'll say, late 70s, there was a Chinese refugee crisis, people fleeing Vietnam after the war. And there were so many people dying, crossing towards China by water and country, that the world finally said, let's do something about this. And we implemented something always looking for in these types of crises called orderly departure program, which is get your papers in your home country. That's been communicated, everything's been verified. We'll fly you directly to the place that you're going to be resettled. That's the opposite here. Everyone comes, everyone submits their papers, and then the process of sorting through them begins. That's dangerous. It forces people to go on these deadly overland routes and oversea routes. We're waiting for an orderly departure program to become part of the solution, but none of the countries in Europe, want to be the one to come out first with a big number, as would be necessary, to say, we'll take 800,000 like Germany's done. You need other countries to do that. Once that consensus is built, you can shape a big strategy, but everyone's thinking about themselves first. It's been very evident on this trip.
Yeah. And last question I've got at the end of this, though, shouldn't you be looking at where they're coming from and maybe change situation there so that they don't want to make these or have to make this journey?
Well, look, I think we sort of are, but look at how efficacious our strategy has been.
True.
Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, we are trying to change the strategies, or trying to change the situations in those countries, but intervention is what's forcing these people to leave. So at some point, you just have to, you disentangle humanitarian from politics for a reason. You've got to deal with the reason they're leaving, but you also just need to take care of the people. And at this point, 60,000 Syrians a month coming to Europe, you've got to deal with them first, and then let Syria's strategy wait for someone else or back out altogether.
There you go. Well, I wish you the best, the safest trip there, and be careful, and I wish you the best, and I look forward to hearing more when you get back.
Thanks, Rick.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much, Luke. Luke Vargas, Talk Radio News Service. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. Striking Amazon warehouse workers at California's Cal Cartage Warehouse are heading back to work after a brief strike last week. The week of strikes and picketing by port truckers and warehouse workers at the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach was capped by $3.5 million in new wage theft claims filed with California's Labor Commissioner. Warehouse worker Anthony Velacio says that striking workers will present a petition to the bosses and come back to work with community support to end their strike on Monday.
We will give them a petition signed by all the co-workers that we are going back to work. They are supposed to let us back in by law. And not only that, we are going to have support from the community, other organizing members from other organizations, as well as the Teamsters. And we are going to push to make sure everybody goes back to work right away.
Velacio says the warehouse workers' struggle at the ports is for a living wage, decent working conditions, and the right to form a union. He says working conditions inside the warehouses need to be improved along with the wages.
We work in our butts off holidays. They want you constantly just breaking your back for them. Started to implement a heat break, which they've been trying to deny us. We've been taking it little by little, but they've been giving hassles about it, writing up and intimidating us. Not only that, it's unsafe. There's some areas where it's really unsanitary. Our lunch breaks where we have to eat, it's right next to our containers, right next to the forklifts where all the smoke. It's just horrible, to tell you the truth. We're infested with rats as well as roaches.
Drivers at XPO Logistics, Intermodal Bridge Transport, and Gold Point Transportation have ended their strikes. Pacific 9 transportation drivers remain on strike indefinitely. According to a group called GPAC, part of Chicago's gun violence problem is the availability of guns bought by straw buyers who make gun buys at suburban dealers and then give the guns to criminals. GPAC is an organization formed to counter the influence of the gun lobby in Illinois. The group filed suit to try to get suburban dealers to crack down on straw purchases. GPAC Executive Director Kathleen Stancis says the suit resulted in one of the communities, the Village of Lyons, passing an ordinance to crack down on the straw buys.
GPAC's focus is really getting illegal guns off the streets. We don't look at this as a violation of the Second Amendment. This is simply keeping guns away from criminals. We have, since our inception 2 years ago, put together a coalition of 50 policymakers up and down the state that we have endorsed who already are committed to enacting this kind of public safety regulation that will protect our families and communities.
For more information on GPAC, go to gpacillinois.com.
Brought to you by the IBEW, 750,000 men and women powering the way for an American comeback. Information on how to become an International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers Power Professional is online at ibew.org.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
I will oppose the Colombia Free Trade Agreement. I want Congress to pass a set of trade deals. Send a message to Congress to come to an agreement on trade deals.
'Cause they're selling make-believe and we don't buy that good. 'Cause in the real world they're shutting Detroit down.
The sad reality is it's not just Detroit they're shutting down. Yeah, I grew up in Cleveland where you had steel mills and auto plants and all kinds of manufacturing, and I go home and I see those empty plants, I see those empty buildings, and immediately I think of the lives that those jobs made better. And what are those folks doing now? And it's all because of this. We need cheap, exploitable labor. We need lax environmental laws. We need to export, manufacturing and really wealth creation for working people. Not for the wealthy. They do very well. Thank you very much. But just for the rest of us, which is why when a couple of listeners sent me this article over at the United Steelworkers blog, I go, this is a great opportunity to kind of go back because it showed a picture of a bridge I've been over 100 times and talked about numerous times over the years there in Trenton, New Jersey, that said in big lights, Trenton makes, the world takes. The question is Trenton still making? And is the U.S. still making? Which is why I've asked its author, Richard Cook-Reese, to come and talk to us a little bit about his article and maybe a little bit about where we should be going with trade. Richard, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me on, Rick.
So, when I see this article that you wrote, and by the way, great job. We've got a link at thericksmithshow.com so folks can take a look at it. It was the photo that grabbed me because, we as a nation were the manufacturing nation of the world. And we've we've lost it. Well, wait a minute. We didn't lose it. We know exactly where it is. We gave it to China.
Yes, we did. And I mean, even outside of the Trenton area, where I work at, U.S. Steel, Fairless Works, when I first started there, about 8,000 employees. In its heyday, almost 10,000. We have a galvanizing line left, and it's 80 employees. That's all that's left.
80? That's it?
Yes.
From 10,000. And
Yes.
where do those jobs go? I mean, because we hear, well, manufacturing is all automated now, which a lot of it coming back is automated, but not all of those people can be automated away.
No, and most of what we ran into, especially while I was there in the late 80s, is you were getting dumped steel cheap from Japan, Brazil. At that time in the early 90s, when the Soviet Union fell and became Russia, we were starting to see some from there. India, and then, of course, unfortunately, later on, China glutted the market, as they are doing again to us now, which is crippling the steel industry.
And, the thing that gets me is, I don't know if it's we don't learn history, that we don't think about history, but you go back to World War II, and this is, not just a cliche, it's reality. The reason that we came out on top of that was we had a very strong manufacturing base. I'm concerned today, I look at those steel mills that used to be in Cleveland. They're all now bars and restaurants. I look at the auto plants. They're now all just crumbling buildings. I worry we don't have that manufacturing prowess we once had.
Absolutely, we don't. And I could give you a perfect example, although it's not in Trenton. The original Bethlehem Steelworks up in Bethlehem, PA, is now a place of gambling. It's a casino.
It's insane. And in fact, the Bethlehem Steel name is now a soccer team.
Yes. And it's very sad to see. And I mean, as far as even getting back into what I wrote my last article about with Trenton, you had fine porcelain made there, Lennox, Beam. Most of those are gone, and you had loads of other places like that. You had Roebling Steel over there. You had U.S. Bridge over there, which was, helped in making the Golden Gate Bridge. At one time, spans for the Brooklyn Bridge, the Capitol Dome pieces were made there at one time. And so you see what's left, and like you said, it's sad. It's rubble. It's buildings that have been made into market areas, attachments to sporting arenas. And although it looks nice and glitzy, the jobs are not what was sustaining to a good middle class like they used to be.
Yeah, look, I grew up in Cleveland, and I've often talked about, getting one of those jobs at the Ford or the Chevy plant or the steel mill or in any of those good, solid union, back-breaking, hard labor jobs, but still good-paying union jobs. People's lives got better, and not just the people who got them, but the rest of the economy, because they had something that is kind of, like a dinosaur today, this idea of disposable income.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, the biggest argument that I still have with people, and I had it even when I was 19, I learned it young, thankfully, that it raises all boats. If we're making good money, the people who we're sending steel to fabricate it into cans or into cars or into parts for vending machines, decking for the World Trade Center. Like our plant made some of the decking that's gone into World Trade One, and that helps iron workers have jobs, which are good paying jobs. And I mean, you just see all the secondary positions that it creates that are very well sustaining jobs. Like you said, where a person has disposable income, they can actually afford to go out and buy that car or that house.
But do you think the average person in Trenton looks at that sign? Because I understand you're from that area. Do you think the average person, and I used to remember thinking this driving over it, do you think the average person knows how much we've lost and how much of I mean, for 100 years, we were the world's manufacturer. That has gone away. Do you think the average person gets it?
Unfortunately, I think a lot of the people that got it have passed on. I think the younger generations basically ask the question, what does it even mean? What does that slogan even mean? And when you tell them what it meant, you can almost see in some of the younger people that they do get it, that, wow, what did we go and lose that for? Because they're starting to see that it doesn't really matter if you have a college education. You're not getting the jobs and the offers out there anymore.
Right.
And
you can't even fall
when
back
I went to school for a little while, for college, you knew that there was always a fallback. If college didn't work out, you had the mill, you had GM, et cetera, et cetera.
But I was just about ready to say that you had something to fall back on if it didn't work out. And I remember a couple of years ago, I gave a speech. I was part of a rally here in Harrisburg on higher education cuts. And one of the kids I was standing in front of before it was my turn to speak was, like a junior in college. And he said to me, he goes, at the end of the day, this is all I have left. My grandfather worked in the mill. My father worked in the mill. There's no mill left for me to go back to. And, I think this generation more than any has had that in the back of their head that, we got to get the college education because that's the only way to the middle class without, actually knowing that, working with your hands and creating something is a job of value, but one that used to create a middle class existence.
Absolutely. And I think the ones that do get it, I mean, the one thing I've enjoyed reading is that the mini resurgence that you kind of are seeing in Detroit is all younger people. And they're trying, even if it's just small manufacturing, they're trying to bring something back because they actually are noticing now that label-wise, you're not seeing things made in America anymore. And if it is, it's very hard to find. You almost have to scour the internet and go on to see if anything is still made in America. And it's good to see that they're getting that. But then at the same time, when you're going to Occupy Wall Street like a couple of us did, you're also hearing from the kids that, why did all the generations before us sell this out? They didn't even give us an opportunity to say we wanted these jobs if that's what we wanted to do.
That's an excellent point. And it comes back down to this idea of greed on one hand, but the other part of it, and I go back and I think about my grandfather who told me that if I would end up following in his footsteps as a truck driver, I would be a failure. I think there was a generation that said, you know what, I've worked hard, I've done these crummy jobs, and I've busted my behind so that you don't have to. And I think that mentality of the next generation doing better, that working class ethic of, work hard, play by the rules, they wanted to see their kids get ahead.
Yes, and I mean, I definitely faced that. Most everybody in my family did, out of my generation, go on to college, went to more white-collar jobs. A lot of them ended up on Wall Street, so unfortunately they were almost like adversaries compared to where I was at.
Right.
But, I went to college, tried it for a while, didn't work for me, but I always had that feeling that, like you said, doing the work with your hands, the honest jobs, they should be there. And I do understand, because a lot of my family went, why would you want to go into those jobs that we were trying so hard to get you away from? But it has a certain lure towards it, and it definitely has a good feeling about doing that kind of work.
Yeah,
and
especially when you can look at,
we're making a generation miss that.
Right, especially looking at the World Trade Center and saying, the trade towers there, and go, what, I helped build that. I helped, my labor, my work, my hands helped to create that.
Absolutely, Rick. And that's actually one of the last paragraphs of one of my blog articles. I wrote that about the TPP, that, there's going to be a time where there's a generation that's not able to point at something like I was able to do to guys in Pittsburgh when we went to a rally this year for our contract with U.S. Steel, and go, my great-grandparents and great-uncles, and they came to America and came to Pittsburgh and made some of these old buildings. You're actually able to point at them like I'm going to be able to do when I bring my children to see the Trade Center. And it's sad that we're losing that.
So the question is, how do we stop this? We've been talking about this bad trade agreement. In fact, one of the reasons that I voted for the president and supported him was because of his stance on trade. I remember standing 20 feet from him when he said the opening clip, you can trust me. No more bad free trade agreements. And here we are, the trade agreements he said he wasn't going to pass, the chorus, the Colombia, the Panama, all gone right through. And now this one, which is even worse. And the other part of it is, I remember him saying we were going to renegotiate NAFTA. And I'm told that's what this is, only we've made NAFTA worse.
Yes, and again, I mean, one of the worst ones we've had, even before what can be coming our way with the TPP, has been Chorus. And I mean, we've basically given up the house on Chorus. We were told it would support 70,000 jobs. It would add about 10 billion to, our revenues. And instead, the numbers are much more sobering against us, as they always have been. We've had a net loss of 75,000 jobs. We've only increased exports about 800 million, and our trade deficit with them has been raised by 26.4 billion with South Korea.
So let me ask you.
You can see it's hurting all around.
Oh, it's killing us. All these bad trade schemes are killing us, but it's making Wall Street fat and happy, which kind of makes you go, who are we negotiating for? So let me ask you, do you buy the Donald Trump frame that our negotiators are stupid, or do they just not have working people's priorities at heart?
I think they don't have working people's priorities at heart. But just as an aside with Mr. Trump, I wonder how much I believe in him either, because when he had a chance to do the right thing, he had foreign companies working on his clothesline.
Certainly.
So, I mean, it happens all the way around that
Absolutely.
we hear all these good things from business owners and from politicians about what they're going to do. And then the more you delve into their pasts, you see that they were also not a helper to the American worker.
No, I'm no Trump fan. I'm just saying. I mean, one of the things that's gotten him some attention is he's saying that they're all stupid. And I'm going, no. These are very brilliant people. They have figured out how to get working class people like you and me, Richard, to say, you know what, we're going to vote for you, and you're going to keep pushing through these bad trade schemes that are going to ship my job overseas and then humiliate and degrade me when I need help for education or need help to feed my family. That's all I was going for.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, you can even go back as far as, like you said, the first mega deal with NAFTA. The way it was framed by the Clinton administration was that this was going to be a win-win for us.
Yep.
The jobs of the past would somehow float down to there, and the jobs of the future would emerge here. Your pay scale wouldn't change. You'd still have great benefits. You'd still be able to have that American dream. And Mr. Perot got it the best when he said it's really just going to be the giant sucking sound of all your jobs disappearing.
Yeah, well, I mean, historically, he was right. And I think everyone at the time knew he was right, but we wanted to believe because it was almost bipartisan. I mean, Clinton gets responsibility for it. But honestly and truthfully, the entire agreement was negotiated fully under George H.W. Bush. And had he won, he was going to sign it too. So Perot's place was pointing out that both of them are standing against you.
Oh, absolutely. I think the main reason why the Clinton administration got stuck with it also was because by then, remember, you had a Republican Congress that basically told him, basically, you're going to pass this or nothing of yours gets done. It was basically like you were held hostage to that agreement. And unfortunately, the losers in that were the American workers.
And this is where, when I went to a number of the original Tea Party events, I was not surprised to find a lot of union workers, a lot of people who had gotten screwed because of our trade deals, which is why I think this is one of those areas that can pull us politically back somewhere to the middle where we go, you know what, we can disagree on gay marriage and abortion and all that other stuff. We can bicker over that later, but the jobs, the kitchen table economics, that might be able to bring us back together.
Absolutely, and it's funny because again, I've written about that in a few of my blogs that this is definitely an issue that should be able to galvanize everybody. It should be union workers, non-union workers, party affiliations should be put aside. I wish the apathy of the voter and the people in general would just kind of break for this once, and that we get back to the days of the power of the people in the streets where we actually go to Washington or go to Wall Street and show a mass unity of divergent interests where they actually have to wake up and take notice. I mean, Occupy kind of did that, but you also had a certain amount of the media that was trying to make it sound like it was it was
rape
I
fest.
guess best way to describe it, dirty hippie movement to make them feel like they were doing something that their parents did.
Yeah, I remember looking at the Fox News saying that was it. It was the dirty hippie rape fest.
Yes.
That's all they said. And I don't know that there were any actual cases of that actually happening, but they sure reported on it a lot. So let me ask you a last line of questioning, because you've hit on something that I've talked about ad nauseum, this idea that people need to get back engaged. And sadly, what these trade agreements have done, it's been the death of thousands of paper cuts. And where most people look at it, it's not me today, that's somebody else's problem. How do we get past that kind of apathy, do you think? Because, I look at the chorus. I bring up the chorus to people, they don't even know what I'm talking about. Like I've got a third head.
Well, I could definitely agree with you on that. When we went to Washington, the steelworkers with Rapid Response to lobby against the TPP, when we actually had our physical rally outside the Capitol and we were walking around with our signs, we had people of all different age groups coming up going, "Oh, what are you guys rallying for?" And we'd go, we're rallying for all of us against this horrible trade agreement, the TPP. And the vast majority of people didn't even know what the TPP is, who's in it, what it's going to cover, what it might take away.
Yeah, I remember the time, because everyone knew who the runaway bride was. Everybody knew who, the latest pop culture fad was. But the job-killing trade schemes that keep making their way through our halls of power, they don't seem to ever really get reported on, which is why I think it's great that you're doing the work that you do, and I appreciate you coming on and talking to us a little bit, Richard. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you.
Really great talking to Richard Kukaris. You've written a great piece, and I highly suggest people take a look at it. I've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. Just click on Richard's name, take you right there. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Today's empire, tomorrow's ashes.
Exposing that free trade is never free. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1928. That was the day that police shot at protesting union workers at Prince's Pier in Melbourne, Australia. 3 union workers were injured, 1 fatally. Each day, the workers on the wharf had to muster or gather and hope to be picked for a job by one of the shipping companies. The practice often led to corruption and inconsistent work for the men. The Waterside Workers Federation Union sought an end to the hiring method. The union had been formed in 1901 to represent workers on the waterfront in response to the dangerous and often brutal working conditions workers toiled under. The ship companies were determined to undermine the union's influence. They had the support of conservative Prime Minister Stanley Bruce. And on this fateful day, armed police brought in non-union workers to Prince's Pier. 1,000 union workers lined the docks to protest against this scab labor. Skirmishes broke out between the police and union workers. The police fired into the crowd. One of those bullets found the neck of Australian World War I veteran Alan Whitaker. Whitaker, like many men, had returned to Australia after the war, seeking work on the docks. It took 3 excruciating months for Whitaker to die from his wound. The shooting was declared justified. In 2010, a group of local historians and union members organized to look further into the case. An article published in the Sydney Morning Herald under the headline, "The Truth Was the First Casualty of the 1928 War on the Waterfront." It concluded the original investigation had been a whitewash. Whitaker's story, like those of workers who died fighting for dignity at the workplace, is up to us to uncover, pass on, and remember. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Tales of American Political History with Clinton Porter Hackney.
There are a few issues that virtually every human society has to tackle. There's education, safety, enforcement of rules. And then there's transportation. Footpaths, wheels, boats, roads, trains, cars, and planes. The needs and desires for people to get from one place to another create problems, debates, and eventually solutions. And it's usually one of the least controversial matters people deal with. In America, we've tended to take big leaps using giant projects in building our transportation infrastructure. There were the trails blazed for the Pony Express and a grand network of rails in the East, followed by building the Lincoln Highway for early automobiles and the interstate highway system built in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And if I were going to teach a class on how American democracy works, I'd need only 2 books, both about transportation. Join us again for the Golden Spike. This is Clinton Porter Hackney at cphackney.com.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME.
We make Pennsylvania happen!
Exposing that free trade is never free. The Rick Smith Show.
Talk about the U.S. inflation. I understand just a little. No comprende, it's a riddle.
I gotta tell you, not so much of a riddle when you look at these free trade schemes. Maybe at the beginning, maybe when the NAFTA was being thrown around as, hey, we're going to be able to create thousands, millions of jobs. It'd be great. It's going to be great. Be fabulous for everyone. Fantastic. And I grew up during that era, so I remember the rhetoric, and I remember going, that doesn't make sense to me. As a kid who grew up on the streets, I remember going, hold on, wait a second. So what you're telling me is they're not going to all run down south of the border? They're not all going to run away from here, set up shop somewhere, use cheaper labor, and then bring it back here? Because, I mean, it just makes common sense. Because, and I guess part of what we were sold is that the American companies were proud to be American companies and that they had patriotic responsibilities. And we see how that's worked. I'm often amused by the companies that, wave the flag and do all of the "we love America" kind of stuff, and then are shipping jobs overseas, are breaking unions, and are destroying working conditions here by using the threat of these bad free trade agreements. And we as workers, kind of, you're on the treadmill, head down, going, oh, I just got to make it till tomorrow. Thank goodness I still have a job, until they take that away. Because that's what they've trained us to think about. Wow, just keep your head down. Just keep moving. And individually, I understand that, which is why you need to have collective action, why you need to have a bunch of people involved. Everybody. Which is why you saw the rising conditions during the 50s and 60s. And, this presidential election, much like the last one, is going to be an opportunity to talk about those things. And I see just the other day, Hillary Clinton was down in Charleston, South Carolina, down at the ILA Hall down there, the International Longshoremen's Association Hall that we were at back in August, or when we were doing our civil rights tour. The rally was hosted by them. Basically, there's a big organizing drive going down at Boeing, because, the workers are going, man, we're working all these hours, we're getting crummy wages, and they're going, we'd like what the guys in Washington have. And that's how it starts. It isn't looking at those guys in Washington going, oh, they make too much money. Look at what we do, and we do it for half of what they do. I mean, that's just twisted to me. They're going, hey, it would be great if we could do like those guys in Washington. So let's do what they do and organize. So Hillary's at this rally, and she references the organizing going on at the Charleston Boeing plant. And she says, look, they, meaning the people at Boeing, are fighting for the right to organize free from intimidation and harassment because those rights are central to building a middle class. She said, we need to stand up to attacks on workers' rights. And I agree. She says that, she knows that they're in the state of South Carolina. There's a big effort from the top, meaning Nikki Haley with her pointy shoes, kicking labor in the stomach or wherever she thinks she can. But she says there's a big effort from the top going through your government to dismantle collective bargaining rights. And looking at herself, she says, look, a lot of people, poor people here in South Carolina who need good jobs, rising wages, safe working conditions. She says, yes, I know South Carolina is a so-called right to work state, but you should have the right to have someone looking out for you and your best interests when it comes to your job. She says, we need the same balance of power within our economy. The checks and balances that this nation was built on. She says, and that's one of the reasons why unions have to be at the table. I'm telling you. Bernie has done a fantastic job in getting the message moved to the left, getting the message moved to the working class, getting the message moved to the economic table, kitchen table, if you will, talking about, hey, we need jobs that pay. We need healthcare. We need retirement security. We need family leave. We need things that benefit the family, not just rhetoric, not just verbiage, not just, we're the party of family values. We care about the children, but actual policy and actual movement and actual things. Show us what you're going to do. And I look at Paul Ryan, who, I don't know if you saw it on Sunday, did really just a crummy interview where he gives this halfway answer of, I care about my kids. I want to stay home on Saturday and Sunday and see my kids. But that's people want their congressman to be like them. You're right. I do. I want you working 50, 60, 70 hours a week and forced overtime and all of the things that go into this with no extra pay. And you don't get to see your kids and plan your schedule and do all that stuff. Yeah, I think, the rest of us would like to see that. And by the way, if someone gets sick, you got to figure out how you're going to take care of it and not get paid for it. Think about that. So I'm not a big, huge Paul Ryan fan, just not. But it's good to see Hillary coming around on the message. She's been there. I think this is good stuff. Anyway, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we can rage a little bit. It is Raging Monday. Kevin Mahoney will be here from Raging Chicken Press on the latest bit of in the war on higher education. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show.
I guess that's why they call me. They call me the working man.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
That's the way we deal with global warming, climate change, or any of those problems. Not through government invention, not through government taxes.
Government can't wave a magic wand and make that happen. Let the private sector do this.
Republicans pan government action on climate and energy at their third presidential debate.
Special GNR coverage straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Governor Pataki, you've indicated you believe climate change is real and caused at least in part by human activity.
He's a witch. Burn him. This is your Green News Report.
Witch!
Okay, Desi Doyen, is it just my imagination, or are we actually seeing more conversation about climate change coming out in Republican presidential debates? And not to scoff at it, but to actually discuss what to do about it.
Well, it's a start. They don't really talk much about policy, but at least they're not as aggressively denying the science.
Former New York Governor George Pataki came out and actually excoriated the party, said that, yes, climate change is real. He's mad at Republicans for not understanding that. That's a start. Have I set the bar too low?
I believe you have, but hey, that's kind of where we are with today's Republican Party.
Plus, he was in the undercard kiddie table debate, so no one really saw that. So there's that.
Yes, at the third Republican presidential primary debate, both the main and the junior debate in Boulder, Colorado on Wednesday, debate host CNBC said they were going to focus on economic issues. And although one of the fastest growing sectors of the economy is clean energy, CNBC only briefly mentioned energy and climate change. In the so-called undercard debate, as you mentioned, former New York Governor George Pataki broke ranks and criticized the anti-science stance of most of his party.
One of the things that troubles me about the Republican Party is too often we question science that everyone accepts. I want Republicans to embrace innovation and technology. We could have far more clean energy. We can have next generation nuclear, thorium reactors that have no risk of meltdown. We can have solar panels on every home, R&D credits, let the private sector do this. We can export those technologies to places like China.
Now, Pataki was the only one to discuss really any kind of policy or expansion of clean energy. He echoes the policies of Democratic presidential candidates about accelerating clean energy investment and exporting that technology to the rest of the world, but he didn't have any real solutions for actually reducing emissions that cause climate change.
Yeah, there was some question about what will you do about climate change, and then they go on to talk about how we have to have as much energy as possible and never actually talk about reducing carbon emissions. New Jersey Governor Chris Christie in the main debate offered a similar take.
We've laid out a national energy plan that says that we should invest in all types of energy. We need to make sure that we do everything we can across all kinds of energy. Natural gas, oil, absolutely. But also where it's affordable, solar, wind in Iowa has become very affordable and it makes sense. That's the way we deal with global warming, climate change, or any of those problems. Not through government intervention, not through government taxes.
Yes, well, wind in Iowa has become very affordable thanks to government tax credits. Not sure how more development of oil helps climate change.
That's right, it doesn't. Now, notice that Pataki and the other candidates advocate waiting for the private sector to get around to this. But the fact is that government research funding has been the main driver behind pretty much all tech innovation, from the internet to cell phones to fracking.
To oil and coal production for decades.
Exactly. And although he criticized the role of government policy, Governor Chris Christie took credit for New Jersey ranking third in the nation for solar installations. That's correct, but it wasn't a private sector miracle. That was thanks to government policies put in place by previous administrations.
Exactly. He actually pulled out of a regional greenhouse gas initiative. So it's fun that he's taking credit for what he didn't do.
And also note that for some reason, the other candidates kept completely silent and did not jump in to add their 2 cents for this.
Go figure.
No discussion of the UN climate talks either, which the next president will have to deal with. So we got basically the same Republican Party talking points, more oil and gas drilling, and no matter what their position on climate change, all of the Republican presidential candidates all agree we should make sure the government does nothing on climate. And although this CNBC debate was focused on economic issues, another thing CNBC did not cover was that this week, more major corporations have signed on to climate action. The White House announced on Monday that 81 more big corporations have signed on to support President Obama's Clean Power Plan.
So corporations, the private sector, is coming on board with what Barack Obama is doing. This debate on CNBC was supposedly about your money, your economy. Nobody talked about that. No questions were raised about that. The economy goes on. The fight against climate change goes on, as if it never occurred in the Republican Party and even on CNBC.
Yep.
For much more on our coverage today and the stories we couldn't get to, thanks to the Republicans and their debate and CNBC, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Sounds of silence.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, Rick at thericksmithshow.com. So earlier today, I was reading a story that just grabbed my attention. One of those moments where you go, exactly how is this possible that a university can let all of their adjunct professors go, say, you know what, we've been going through this union battle for a couple of years now. We've been fighting through the system, and you know what, we just decided, well, we're going to let you all go. And that appears to be what has happened out at Duquesne University, where we've been following this for a while, where the adjunct professors had filed for an election, went through the NLRB, went through all this stuff, overwhelmingly voted for it, and then the college says, you know what, we've changed our tactics. And they've been fighting this tooth and nail until we just find out recently that they're going to let them all go at the end of this semester. And it's just indicative of what's happening to workers all across this country. And we're here to talk a little bit about this and the war on higher education. Our good friend, Editor Zero, Raging Chicken Press, Kevin Mahoney. Kevin, thanks for taking time for us, man.
You got it, Rick. And I tell you, this one's got me fired up.
As it should have a lot of people fired up, because the reality is we have laws in this country, and I don't care what your religious belief is, we follow them.
No, that's absolutely right. But this is what makes this exceptionally insane and absolutely infuriating. Right? You'll remember a few years back, right? We had Margaret Mary Vajko, right? The 83-year-old adjunct.
Yep.
Right, who was cut from her job after service of getting something like $2,500 to $3,500 a course, right? In order to teach, and she labored on and on for this university. And when they found out, well, she's getting too old, we're just going to cut her loose without health insurance, without any place to go, and she basically died from she had a cardiac arrest, collapse on her front lawn practically, right, and died a couple days later. That's the same university that has been going about these anti-union tactics, that has done everything you could possibly do to say that I am the worst possible employer you can be, and certainly not someone who's worthy of the name of at least this Pope Francis. But you forget, this is a Catholic institution, and supposedly, I guess they had not learned anything from the Pope's recent visit, because what the Pope has done, the Pope has come on and said, hey, look, trade unions have been an essential force for social change, without which a semblance of a decent and human society is impossible under capitalism. I don't know how much more clear you get from that, from the supposed leader of the Catholic Church. And then you have these people at Duquesne University basically just saying, hey, you know what? We're going to toss all of you to the curb because we do not agree with the decision of the NLRB, and we do not want to give dignity to our faculty members. It's absolutely infuriating.
For a moment, I had actually forgot about the case of that woman who died. She was an adjunct for 25 years, and they would not give her a full-time job. They just kept stringing her along, as they have done with these adjuncts. Now, look, this could be a potential where they're going, well, we're going to get rid of the adjuncts and they'll all be full-time professors. That's not what we're seeing at this moment.
No, absolutely not. And look, what they're saying, this is incredible. Reading through even the reporting in the Post-Gazette today, I'm sorry, on the 29th of today, but when after the first story broke out in these times about all the mass layoffs that were taking place, particularly in the English department, which happened to have they were the leaders of the unionization movement, because English departments have historically high rates of adjunct labor, teaching kind of piecemeal courses, part-time adjunct faculty working a contingent basis. And so they were all fired except for one person, only because that one person that was not fired was because he was part of a learning community they couldn't get rid of so easily. If you know anything about higher education labor, you know that you cannot simply just kind of say, oh, in one semester going from a fall to a spring semester, you do not have a rapid fall off of enrollments. This was calculated. And for Duquesne University to send their spokesperson forward, Ms. Fair, said that, quote, any reduction or increase in the number of adjuncts needed is absolutely nothing to do with the union. For them to come out and say this is just a blatant lie, a deception of the worst kind. And it's disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting.
And what this is, from someone who watches this stuff go on, this is clearly retribution.
Absolutely.
And sadly, our labor laws are so badly broken and so outdated that the penalties that they'll suffer are, even when they're found to be in violation of the law, are so minuscule that they're going to be all inconsequential, because nobody will go to jail, nobody will be held accountable. And if these adjuncts get their jobs back, all they get back is what they would have lost, minus what they earn in the interim.
That's absolutely right, and I think everybody needs to be reminded. All the listeners need to be reminded that this is a perfect test case to show you that we have got to kind of like take to the streets and mobilize on a mass scale, because these are adjuncts. These are people at the bottom of the scale in terms of their job security, in terms of their pay, in terms of access to health care, all those things, right? They went at this for years. United Steelworkers kind of have been organizing with these adjuncts for several years now, and they finally won with the NLRB. They went through all the appeals. The National Labor Relations Board ordered basically the lower court basically to say, nope, they have the right to unionize, and to basically say you now have a union because you voted for it. So this is a perfect case of the process being followed. And what is Duquesne's response to this? Duquesne's response was simply this: well, we didn't like the outcome, so we're going to fire our attorney. Then we're going to go grab this Memphis-based union-busting attorney called Arnold Pearl, right, and relitigate the entire thing. Because they know, right, they just got the coffers there. And it shows that the kind of money that they're willing to spend to keep workers down, right, to keep them under their thumb is astounding, rather than giving people, and they weren't even going to get a living wage. They were talking about $4,000 a course, which is still like barely keeping above poverty level.
That's insane. And the sad thing is I guess the question I have is, does this now become the way that all of the universities that are seeing their adjuncts saying, hey, we've been exploited enough, we demand some rights? Because I understand there's a campaign going on over at Temple University there in Philadelphia, right?
That's right. It is a perfect example, right? So this is the one bright spot across about what we see in the Duquesne thing is that they're not alone. Because basically we've had the adjuncts down at Temple. Again, same kind of a long process. They've been organizing. Right now, they're tenured faculty and tenure track faculty, and they have these other kind of term appointments. They are all part of the union. They're all part of the Temple Association of University Professionals, which is an AFT affiliate. And they have been organizing there for years. And like what we saw in Duquesne, these folks, and Temple is a quasi-public. They actually were fine. The Pennsylvania Labor Relations Board found that nope, they have the right to organize. And basically, the ballots are set to go out now. They've got the go-ahead for the ballots to be sent out on November 9th, so like a week from today. And they're due back the day or two before Thanksgiving. So we should know by Thanksgiving whether the Temple adjuncts get to join the faculty union there. And then also, just this past Monday, we found out that the steelworkers also confirmed that out in Pittsburgh, the University of Pittsburgh faculty are now in the midst of an organizing drive. And they're organizing from the ground up. They're organizing from part-time faculty right up through tenured and tenure-track faculty, so right across the board. So if anything, the bright spot is not so much the awfulness, the behavior of the Duquesne administration, but it's much of the fact that enough of these workers are standing up and say, enough, and we're going to go at this as a whole. And the resistance to pitting one group of faculty members against another is really heartening. But I'm telling you, it's a tough fight ahead.
So let me ask you, not to sound conspiratorial, but you look at the timing of this, and I know it's on opposite ends of the states and all of this, but it seems to me that by doing this now, you could conceivably put a chilling effect on the election there at Temple by saying, look, if we organize, Temple may get rid of us like Duquesne did.
Yeah, but you know what? The folks at Temple have kind of cut their teeth in battles with their provost, and the fact that you already have a union on campus, that's actually helpful in the Temple case. I think, again, this could be conspiratorial of my own. I mean, tomorrow's election day, right? Tomorrow, people are going to be going to the polls, and they're going to be voting on the Supreme Court justice, where ultimately going to be some of the folks that may see this stuff in court. Right, so I look at what was some of Duquesne's responses here, and like, man, it's like these are kind of sending messages to folks that we want to get those folks on the court, that we want to basically be able to overturn these laws. We want to be able to kind of, turn back the time clock on what the National Labor Relations Board has done. I mean, I see this like, this stuff coming down right before we see a kind of midterm election. it seems like, man, looks like these people are all on the same page, and they just want to kind of gut union rights any chance they get.
No, I mean, that's the reason I think this way, is because, at the end of it, what we see is this kind of collusion of how these things tend to, and you sound conspiratorial, almost crazy, but I got to be honest, it just seems too convenient.
Yeah, it is. Well, the thing is that why I think we can say that this is actually beyond conspiracy at this point is the fact that these people have been eating at that trough for several decades now.
True.
So these people who are at the top, who are making decisions over the conditions of labor, over the conditions of all of our lives, right? For them, this is just common sense, right? I mean, the right wing has done their work. They have done their work. They have dug in. They basically have weeded out all the executives that would want to come down on the side of labor, especially at universities like we're seeing here, and basically said, you know what, we want to get, we're going to just kind of apply our logic of shock doctrine. We are going to create crisis at any chance we get in order to kind of enact our will. And I think that's really kind of where we're at. The conspiracy is like, a decade behind us in the rear view mirror. These folks are just kind of like, kind of living off that food, living off that trough.
Yeah, they've built it, and they're putting the pedal to the metal.
That's exactly it.
And it's scary times for people who work for a living in this country, given the direction of the attack machine that's out there. Which is why I think what we do here on Mondays and what programs like little programs here like we do so vitally important to get the word out. And recently we had the opportunity to come out and talk to your Citizens Media Forum, which was a fantastic event. And thank you for the invitation. Any reaction in the aftermath?
Absolutely. We got nothing but positive. We got positive feedback from people who attended it. Great follow up with our panelists. We had Katie Klobusik, Steve Horn, and Zach Roberts come out for a panel, citizen media panel. Then you, of course, gave the keynote. And I think what was the biggest takeaway, right? Which kind of, again, we've talked about this so often on this show, about the absolute critical need to invest in our media infrastructure, to actually kind of build up a progressive media that is going to support the work that we do. Because one of the things that we heard from our panel, right, is that, a lot of folks that, are doing this work on the edge of poverty. And that's absolutely an insane place to be. We're either kind of folks that are struggling to get by to piece together a living just to kind of do the investigative reporting and reporting on worker struggles that we need, reporting on people's struggles that we need, or you've got folks like me who've got a full-time job and are trying to piece together progressive publications like in my off hours when I'm taking care of my kids or trying to grade my student papers. I mean, we need to seriously take a step forward and say, look, if we're going to do this, we have to do it in a concerted effort. We have to do it well planned, and we have to say this is for the long haul to invest in this media structure if we have any hope to move forward.
So, what kind of thoughts in the aftermath? What direction are you think we're heading?
Well, I'll tell you, one of the things that we're planning on doing, and I can't spill the beans fully at this point, but I know that one of the projects that you and I have been talking about with some other folks too as well, and we're very close to be able to launch this, is that we're going to put together an organization for the sole purpose of bringing folks together and actually starting to build that media infrastructure. And hopefully by maybe by next week when we talk, I'll be able to tell you all the details of it. But I bet people are reining me in and say, wait till you get all the kind of the paperwork signed, the I's dotted and the T's crossed, and then we can go forward with it.
Yeah, get your ducks in a row.
Only when we invest it, we work this together and kind of pool our resources, and then decide, all right, we're going to do this on our own.
Because at the end of it, you look at what our corporate controlled media has fed us, and to be honest, it's turned into, and I hate saying this, almost a propaganda arm of Wall Street and the wealth class. I can't tell you how many people that I've talked to who don't really know anything about the TPP. Mm-hmm. And they don't know that this is going on. And that to me is a problem with our media structure, that you've got this massive trade deal that could really devastate our economy that nobody's really ever heard of.
That's absolutely right. I mean, when we turn on the TV, right, and most Americans still get their news through the TV. When we turn on our TV, what we're watching is different factions of the ruling class argue with each other. We could turn to the kind of like, the more liberal end of the ruling class on CNN or something like that, or MSNBC, arguing with the folks on the far right on Fox News. But we're not getting the perspectives of everyday workers, of everyday people in this country who are just trying to get by and trying to save our democracy.
And at the end of it, it comes down to these fights like at Duquesne and Temple and every workplace in this country, that I think that's where the real important stuff's going on.
Absolutely. And can you imagine if we get to the point where we have the resources that when we see this struggle at Duquesne, when we see this struggle down in Temple, when we see this organizing effort at University of Pittsburgh, that we can put reporters on the ground out there to cover that full time? Can you imagine that future? Well, that's what the right wing saw kind of years ago, and they invested that infrastructure. And now it's up for our institutions, our progressive institutions, our labor organizing organizations to invest in that future too as well.
Well, it comes down to doing the hard work. And, I always think back to a guy named Ralph Reed. And for those who don't know, Ralph Reed was the head organizer, the head guy of the Christian Coalition back in the late 80s and 90s. And when he was asked about how he did it, how'd you organize this amazing, this powerful, constituency of really far out religious people and decent religious people who didn't really know they were being used as dupes. He pulled out the Steelworkers Handbook and said, this is what we did. We organized people on the grassroots, and we engaged them. And that's what has to happen again.
No, absolutely. And you know what? Ralph Reed's a great example, because there's a guy who is fundamentally on the ground for supporting electricity deregulation in this state. And he did it by going to churches and organizing, grassroots organizing at the church level. And that's why we have energy deregulation. He considered that one of his greatest successes of his early organizing stuff.
Yeah, and look how wonderful that is working out for us today.
Yeah, beautiful, right?
Well, it lined his pockets, but it's screwing us. Just another example. But Kevin, I appreciate the time, the thoughts. I look forward to next week when we talk about the exciting endeavors coming up. A little teaser. I think that's good. I look forward to it, man.
All right. We'll talk to you next week, Rick.
Great talking to Kevin Mahoney, editor Zero, Raging Chicken Press. You want to check out their website, ragingchickenpress.com. We've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. Just click on Kevin's name. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
If you're a presidential aspirant and you have to tell people you're a person of integrity, chances are you're not. These odds get worse if you have to hire someone to attest to your honor. How intriguing, then, that a spokeswoman for the Bush campaign was recently trotted out to tell us that, quote, Jeb's record is one of integrity. Her testimonial was necessitated by the still evolving news story that after leaving the Florida governorship in 2007, he immediately cashed in on his name and state government contacts. Bush III became a richly paid legislative consultant and board member to major corporations that had received lucrative benefits from Florida's government while he was at the helm of it. With cynical chutzpah, Jeb, the presidential wannabe, now campaigns as an ethics reformer, piously preaching against the corrupt coziness between moneyed interests and government officials. But in the last 8 years, Preacher Bush has pocketed at least $18 million in personal payment from his own quiet spends through the revolving door of government corporate corruption. Only 4 months out of office, for example, Jeb got a nice sinecure as a board member of the insurance giant Tenet Healthcare, which ran several of Florida's private hospitals under the state Medicare program. In 2006, Tenet was found to have cheated patients and taxpayers with more than $1 billion in overcharges. To settle this malfeasance, the corporation paid only $7 million. Meanwhile, Tenet recently gushed that it has benefited greatly from Mr. Bush's, quote, extensive background in government service and his perspectives on public policy and social issues. In heartfelt gratitude, during the past 8 years, this one corporation alone has put more than $2 million in Bush's pocket. This is Jim Hightower saying, can the guy even spell INTEGRITY? Integrity?
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
It's evening rush hour in Belgrade, Serbia. And in the city park, over 100 young Afghan men linger on the grass in groups. Several others play a casual game of volleyball. But at 9 p.m., they'll all be gone when buses leave Belgrade for the Croatian border.
At this point of time, it is a pure transit. And most of them, they actually leave the same day when they arrived.
Irina Vojakova Solarano is the UN's resident coordinator in Serbia. The vast majority of asylum seekers spend just 3 days here at most, but their numbers are as staggering as the pace of their movement. Earlier this year, Serbia was receiving only 500 people a month.
Now we have, 7,000 people a day.
Among those waiting for the bus, most have been on the road from Afghanistan for more than 2 months, and aggressive policing, extortion, and a maze of bureaucracy the urge to move quickly.
What most of the people need here now, they need shoes. They're always afraid that the one that they have will fall apart and what they will do next.
Vladimir Pocha is the volunteer coordinator at the Asylum Info Center in Belgrade. His volunteers fan out by the hour to city parks and inform new arrivals about the services available to them. Pocha, like many of the volunteers, is a student of psychology, and while even 3 days is too little time to begin sorting through the traumas many asylum seekers have faced, he thinks some added sensitivity and social skills, a little persistence even, go a long way in offering effective support.
I'm good. That's the answer that most of the people give us at first contact. But then after we offer something, it clicks that they can get something here. Because if we ask them what they need, they sort of think that they're making a problem if they ask for something.
In Belgrade, Serbia today and Croatia tomorrow, I'm Luke Vargas with the Talk Radio News Service.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. Striking Amazon warehouse workers at California's Cal Cartage warehouse are heading back to work after a brief strike last week. The week of strikes and picketing by port truckers and warehouse workers at the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach was capped by $3.5 million in new wage theft claims filed with California's labor commissioner. Warehouse worker Anthony Valecio says that striking workers will present a petition to the bosses and come back to work with community support to end their strike on Monday.
We will give them a petition signed by all the co-workers that we are going back to work. They are supposed to let us back in by law. And not only that, we are going to have support from the community, other organizing members from other organizations, as well as the Teamsters. And we are going to push to make sure everybody goes back to work right away.
Valecio says the warehouse workers' struggle at the ports is for a living wage, decent working conditions, and the right to form a union. He says working conditions inside the warehouses need to be improved along with the wages.
We working our butts off all day. They want you constantly just breaking your back for them. Started to implement a heat break, which they've been trying to deny us. We've been taking it little by little, but they've been getting hassles about it, writing up and intimidating us. Not only that, some safe. There's some areas where it's really unsanitary. Our lunch breaks where we have to eat, it's right next to our containers, right next to the forklifts where all the smoke. It's just horrible, to tell you the truth. We're infested with rats as well as roaches.
Drivers at XPO Logistics, Intermodal Bridge Transport, and Gold Point Transportation have ended their strikes. Pacific 9 transportation drivers remain on strike indefinitely. According to a group called GPAC, part of Chicago's gun violence problem is the availability of guns bought by straw buyers who make gun buys at suburban dealers and then give the guns to criminals. GPAC is an organization formed to counter the influence of the gun lobby in Illinois. The group filed suit to try to get suburban dealers to crack down on straw purchases. GPAC Executive Director Kathleen Stancis says the suit resulted in one of the communities, the Village of Lyons, passing an ordinance to crack down on the straw buys.
GPAC's focus is really getting illegal guns off the streets. We don't look at this as a violation of the Second Amendment. This is simply keeping guns away from criminals. We have, since our inception 2 years ago, put together a coalition of 50 policymakers up and down the state that we have endorsed who already are committed to enacting this kind of public safety regulation that will protect our families and communities.
For more information on GPAC, go to gpacillinois.com.
Brought to you by the IBEW, 750,000 men and women powering the way for an American comeback. Information on how to become an International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers Power Professional is online at ibew.org.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Standing up to conservatives and corporatists every weeknight. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm the innocent bystander. Somehow I got stuck between the rock and the hard place, and I'm down
back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So an interesting little tidbit out of the Supreme Court. You know, Anton Scalia does an entire spiel when he goes on the road, takes his dog and pony show out to colleges and universities, and makes a little side money because, as Clarence Thomas has said, they're underpaid there at the Supreme Court. Interesting little bit came out of his mouth back on Wednesday while at Santa Clara University, stating that he has been on the liberal Supreme Court the entire time. And that all of these, these decisions, like Citizens United and all of the anti-worker, all of the anti-consumer stuff that they've done, all liberal stuff. And that in his view, it's a destruction of our democratic system. And also he doesn't believe in the whole living constitution thing. So I got to tell you, it doesn't give me a whole warm, fuzzy feeling when I think about next spring, when one of the biggest cases for workers in probably in 50 years comes before the Supreme Court. And he is the guy that I'm hoping goes the right way on it, which is why we've asked Bruce Lederman. He's a lawyer, attorney out in New York City, also an activist for education, and part of the Badass Teachers Association's amicus brief against what's going on in Friedrichs. Bruce, thanks for taking time for us.
It's a pleasure, Rick.
So I look at this, and I got to tell you, I look at Scalia's statement that it's this liberal court. I guess I don't see it.
Well, I don't think there would be too many people who would call Judge Scalia one of the great liberals of our time, but everybody chooses to look at things through their own vision.
Right. But, here's this thing that gets me. I remember John Roberts during his confirmation process, over a decade ago saying, I'm going to call balls and strikes. We're not going to go upsetting the apple cart, all that kind of stuff. And yet you see some of the rulings like Citizens United, some of the other anti-worker, anti-consumer stuff. What happened to balls and strikes?
Like a lot of things in politics, when you say something's not about money, sometimes it's about money. And in my view, and this is part of what the Bats are focusing on in their amicus brief to the Supreme Court, this case, the Friedrichs case, which ostensibly is about free speech rights, really isn't about free speech rights. It's about so-called reformers wanting to use the legal system to undo unions and the role of unions in public education.
And that's basically what it boils down to. It's telling workers organizations how they can collect money, how they can spend money, and who they can get it from, and who they have to represent. And I've asked this before, because I have friends at the Chamber of Commerce, and I've said, hey, I like some of the things you do. I'd like the benefits you get for your members. I'd like those, please. I just don't want to pay you. I don't want to be a member of your group, but I'd like your benefits. That'd be great.
Well, what the Friedrichs case brings front and center is teachers' unions have done, in many cases, remarkable jobs of representing their members, collective bargaining, and protecting teachers. There has been an unfortunate perception in this country that somehow unions are out there to protect bad teachers, which, while there may be some bad examples of it, is really a gross distortion of the facts.
Right.
And at the same time, the privatization movement, which is an anti-union movement, is looking at a way of cutting the legs out from under the teachers' union. And when people say it's not about money, it's about money. And what this case is about is, if the plaintiffs prevail, if the Friedrichs plaintiffs prevail, it'll be very difficult for unions to raise the money to effectively represent teachers. And that's why the Bats have asked me to get involved in presenting a brief to the Supreme Court, an amicus brief explaining their position, not in terms of the strict legal arguments, but in terms of the principles and in terms of the things that average teachers, average union members would like judges to understand.
Right.
Sometimes what's called the Brandeis brief, named after the famous Judge Brandeis, who sat on the Supreme Court.
Right. And give me a couple more of those back.
Excuse me?
Get me a couple of more Judge Brandeis's back on the court, please, and get rid of some of these ideologues that we have that seem to be.
Absolutely.
Because the Friedrichs, this case really was something that, and you're the lawyer here, but it seemed to me something that's Alito had pretty much set up with his decision and his statements in the Knox case.
Well, You're incredibly well prepared, because that was one of the things I was going to say. At least in the 30-something years since I graduated law school, it's unusual that a judge goes so far out of his way to invite a case. That's something that activists and people do, when they're not judges, but for a Supreme Court judge, essentially to say, I'd like to see somebody bring this case because I'd like to change the law, is something that in my judgment and my experience as a lawyer, is unusual. But Judge Alito did it. This case has been very carefully planned by the people bringing it. They've got it to the Supreme Court, and from the point of view of the teachers who are supporting their unions, very scary on that basis.
Yeah, and in fact, what's happening with the court, and one of my good friends, Ian Millhiser, who is one of the legal experts that we have on from the Center for American Progress, he says we're going back to a time where the Supreme Court is got more power, going to have more power than the other branches of government, and really, it's a scary thing when you have these activist judges who are deciding law and they're not accountable to we the people.
Well, and it's ironic, because if you would look at some of the things that Judge Scalia says and has written, he's saying that shouldn't be what's happening. Judge Roberts, in his confirmation hearing, says, I call balls and strikes. But at the same time, you've seen a decision like Citizens United, change the face of American politics very quickly.
And, again, nothing, you look at the money that's gone into this, that I think has been behind what we're seeing with these kind of anti-worker pieces of legislation, because this is really about stealing the ability of workers to organize and the power that comes with that to build what I think was the largest middle class and prosperous working class in the history of civilization that my grandparents built.
Well, the concluding quote from the brief that I'm working on with the Bats is a quote by Martin Luther King Jr. about how unionism has raised the American worker and one of the single greatest forces in making America great and supporting the people in America.
And I think that message has to be told again and again, because here on this program, we talk about it quite often. I talk about myself. Had it not been for the union card I carried in my wallet for 20 years as a Teamster, I wouldn't live where I am. I wouldn't have the standard of living, the health benefits, and all of those that I've enjoyed over the years. And we would be back at a time where I fear we're heading back to a desperation class. And I don't know if you watched the debates the other night, but it seemed to me that they were preaching the Lochner era. Take us back to no labor laws, no maximum hour laws, no minimum wage, no child labor laws, none of that stuff, just desperation. Well,
it reminds me of part of the reason I ended up getting involved in education to begin with. The reason I'm a real estate lawyer and a commercial litigator. I'm normally not involved in education.
Right.
My wife, however, is a public school teacher and has taught for 20 years. I got involved in this because this year or last year, my wife, to our total shock, got a rating of ineffective on a computerized, what's called VAM model, which Governor Cuomo had enacted. And it was absolutely crazy. My wife is one of the beloved teachers in Great Neck. She has dozens and dozens of students who come back and see her every year and tell her she's one of the best teachers they've ever met. She has absolute support from her principal, the superintendent of Great Neck. But nonetheless, the computer said she was a bad teacher. We tried through the process to say there was a mistake, and we were told, no mistake, the computer is right, and the governor was backing it. And the point for this discussion is, we did file a lawsuit. That's how I got involved. But also at the same time, I tried as a kind of naive lawyer and husband of a teacher to reach out to our politicians. I called our senators, both Senator Schumer and Senator Gillibrand. I called our congressmen. I called the governor's office. I could not get a single politician to pick up the phone and talk to me.
Wow.
Emails did not get returned. Eventually, if you call over and over, a low-level staff person calls you back, asks you what it's about, and says they'll pass the message on. But after dozens and dozens of phone calls and emails to our senators, the White House, our congressmen, the only one who helped a little bit was Congressman Israel. After many, many calls, wrote a letter to the Secretary of Education, which got ignored then by the Department of Education. But my point, and this follows in with what you were saying, is as somebody who had a wife who was just maligned improperly by a system in a way which made absolutely no sense, it is, in my experience recently, it's been absolutely impossible to get a politician to talk to you.
Right.
I'm sure that the forces behind the reform movement, the billionaires, they can pick up the phone and talk to whoever they want. There have been reports of the governor of New York meeting all the time at the Harvard Club with lobbyists to discuss this on the other side. Eventually, I got a meeting with a very low-level local representative of Governor Cuomo, explained the story. The representative was outraged and said, "You're right." I said, "Could you please get us a meeting with the governor?" She said, "Told us the governor will never speak to you."
No, well, not on that. And here's the thing. I mean, imagine, I mean, you understand the law and you know how a lot of this stuff works because it's what you do. Imagine the person who doesn't have that expertise and that experience that you have, how daunting a task it must be to try and navigate those waters.
Absolutely. And that's why I offered and was glad to help BATS submit a brief to the Supreme Court. My wife was lucky in being able to file a lawsuit, which we're waiting for a decision, but we're very optimistic about. I get calls, probably 1 or 2, 3 calls a week now from teachers who just look on the internet looking for help. And if they didn't, and I refer them usually to the unions because I'm not an education lawyer. My case for my wife is a labor of love, but people need help. The union should be able to provide that help. And the case before the Supreme Court is essentially a vehicle to cut the legs out from the financial legs out from under the union and a lot of the good work that the unions do.
Yeah, and that's important to point out. I mean, it's a public neutering is what it is. And I look here in Pennsylvania where they're trying to pass this paycheck protection law that they call it, that has no real anything to do with protecting your paycheck. But it's a nice euphemistic name. But it's all about how you take money away from the workers' organizations to defend the workers. And this is another one of those examples, essentially making a national right to work law for public sector workers. And, you know, I find it interesting that my conservative friends who talk about less intrusive government, get government out of my life, and states' rights are all behind pushing this kind of agenda through.
I agree with you. One of the points we're making in the amicus brief on behalf of the BATS and the teachers who have asked me to help them want to make is that the Supreme Court has many times tried to support states' rights. But here you have a situation which states which allow union agency shop laws, the point of Friedrichs is basically to take that away, to undermine the democratic process. And we're hoping that our amicus brief grabs the attention of some of the judges, perhaps Judge Scalia, to say that this is inherently what the Friedrichs plaintiffs want is anti-democratic. Specifically, the state of California allows agency law. Unfortunately, you do have states, you have governors like Governor Walker, who were very proud of busting the unions and calling their states right-to-work states. Excuse me, but those states which have gone the other way and say we're not going to be a right-to-work state, now we're using the Supreme Court to try to basically make it a right-to-work nation and eliminate unions throughout the nation.
Yep. And that's the game plan. And the sad reality is I don't see enough outrage. Because I think it's just not something that's on our radar, but it's something, you know, the wealth class of this country keenly aware of. And I go back, since you brought up Scott Walker, I go back to the famous video of Diane Hendricks, the billionaire, talking to Walker saying, you know, when do we get right to work? And, you know, he said, first divide and conquer. We're going to first go after the public sector workers, and then we'll go after the rest of it, which leads me to this, you know, this is the first step in this. It's let's get this segment of workers over here, and then eventually it's everyone.
Well, that's why the BATS have asked me to help them submit what I call kind of a Brandeis brief to point this out to the court, hopefully get the attention of some of the members of the court, and perhaps have a little bit of a hook to some of the more conservative judges to understand that what they could potentially be doing in ruling for the plaintiffs in the Friedrichs case would be undermining democratic principles, would be in an anti-democratic way turning the country into a right-to-work country and undermining the good work that, as we conclude, Martin Luther King Jr. saluted the unions for accomplishing.
So let me ask you, in looking at this, because, I've been fearing this case, and as we're looking at, kind of who the person is, everyone keeps telling me Scalia is going to be the deciding vote, because obviously Thomas and Alito, obviously Alito, because he wanted it.
Alito wanted it.
And Thomas is definitely going to go along with whatever harms workers, in my view. It comes down to Roberts and Scalia, and I'm told Roberts is probably going to be more on this, aligned with Alito and Thomas. What are your thoughts?
Well, the one thing I feel and what I've read, Judge Roberts still believes very much in the institutional integrity of the Supreme Court. And that's why a lot of people believe he disappointed the conservatives on the healthcare case, because he realized certain things would, if the Supreme Court took down healthcare, it would be forever a stain on the Supreme Court. And his decision seemed very carefully written in that way. And I do have a certain amount of guarded optimism that he will believe in the principle of stare decisis and will believe that the case which is being challenged, the Abood case since 1977, has stood very well. And what's happened is you have 25 states that have adopted right-to-work principles, but 25 states that have not. And I think he may be fearful of taking his court in a direction where it's the one who undermined that democratic, or if you want to call it ethos, where states like New York, California have gone along and worked very well with allowing unions to exist under a framework that was set up by Judge Stewart in 1977. So I do have some cautious optimism that Judge Roberts, while feared in certain ways as a conservative judge, will look at this from the point of view of the court, the institutional integrity of the court, and the basic principles which have governed law in our country since the founding and since the establishment of the Supreme Court, and continue it. And perhaps the judge will punt on the issue of whether it's right or wrong and just say, it's a principle that has stood the test of time, and the Supreme Court's not going to overrule it now.
No, that's the hope. But I mean, it didn't seem to help much in the Citizens United, where they overturned 100 years of decided law. Just my thought, as an uneducated outside observer of the legal system.
Well, whether you're educated or not, the legal system continues to surprise a lot of us. So your thoughts are as good as anybody's.
So it'll be most interesting to see how this plays out. And at the end of the day, they could cause chaos in the labor movement in this country, and I would say cause what I would think irreparable harm.
If this case is undone, or if the petition is granted and Abood is overruled, it will certainly do a lot of harm, but we'll see where that goes, because politics shows you there's often the law of unintended consequences, and nobody really knows what's going to happen next. But I do feel, and that's why I've signed on to help the BAT, it would be a bad decision by the Supreme Court. And again, I'm cautiously optimistic that our brief will show the Supreme Court, or the BAT's brief will show the Supreme Court, that there are important issues beyond just privatization and beyond just furthering the interests of those looking to undo unions on principle.
There you go. Last question I've got for you in looking at this, if you had to give your thoughts, and I know you've kind of hedged back and forth, does this go the wrong way?
I'm cautiously optimistic it's going to go the right way. Good. I'm cautiously optimistic you're going to definitely have a split vote, but in the end, the principles of stare decisis in this case are going to carry the day in the court. It's not going to overrule Abood, because not too much has changed.
I like your optimism, Bruce, and I appreciate it. And as this continues down the road, we'd love to have you come back and talk about this case as it continues.
It would be my pleasure, Rick. Thanks for talking. It was great speaking with you.
Really great talking with you. Thanks so much, Bruce Letterman. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Together, we We can make America better. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1928. That was the day that police shot at protesting union workers at Prince's Pier in Melbourne, Australia. 3 union workers were injured, 1 fatally. Each day, the workers on the wharf had to muster or gather and hope to be picked for a job by one of the shipping companies. The practice often led to corruption and inconsistent work for the men. The Waterside Workers' Federation Union sought an end to the hiring method. The union had been formed in 1901 to represent workers on the waterfront in response to the dangerous and often brutal working conditions workers toiled under. The ship companies were determined to undermine the union's influence. They had the support of conservative Prime Minister Stanley Bruce. And on this fateful day, armed police brought in non-union workers to Prince's Pier. 1,000 union workers lined the docks to protest against this scab labor. Skirmishes broke out between the police and union workers. The police fired into the crowd. One of those bullets found the neck of Australian World War I veteran Alan Whitaker. Whitaker, like many men, had returned to Australia after the war, seeking work on the docks. It took 3 excruciating months for Whitaker to die from his wound. The shooting was declared justified. In 2010, a group of local historians and union members organized to look further into the case. An article published in the Sydney Morning Herald under the headline, "The Truth Was the First Casualty of the 1928 War on the Waterfront." It concluded the original investigation had been a whitewash. Whitaker's story, like those of workers who died fighting for dignity at the workplace, is up to us to uncover, pass on, and remember. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME.
Just a day job, someone's got to do. It's kinda hard whenever one looks up to you. Try to make it look easy, gonna make it look good, like anybody would. I'm just your average, ordinary, everyday superhero.
I gotta tell you, not much confidence in Anton Scalia being the savior. Just not. And that's how weird things have gotten in this country, where you're looking to Scalia to go do less harm. Don't throw the nation into chaos. I mean, I look what they've done with education. You've really thrown education into chaos. Perfect example. And I think this is a good thing. And I highly advise other school districts to follow suit. In fact, it's what I've been asking for quite some time. Why aren't we suing these people who are screwing our kids out of an education? Why aren't we billing them for it? Logan County, Ohio. The Logan Hocking Local School Board there. It's in the midwestern part of the state of Ohio. The school district there has submitted an invoice to the Department of Education of the state of Ohio for $4.7 million. And what they're saying is pretty simple. Look, you have decided to run parallel school systems out of our money. You're taking money that was supposed to go to public education, supposed to fund our kids, and you've set up an entire another district, another mechanism without figuring out how to pay for it. Now, what they're pointing to is you look at what happened in Youngstown, where they just walked in and said, you know what, we're taking all of that money that was supposed to go to public education, and we're just going to transfer the whole district over to charter schools. You're all done. No more public school. It's all over. All of the parents, all of you people who had your property values tied up in, we've got a reasonable school, you're all screwed. We're now going to experiment with something new. And this is what the school board was saying. Look, in the Logan Hocking school board, saying, look, if they can do it to Youngstown, they can come and do it to us. Granted, Youngstown, a very poor district, high poverty rate, mostly a community of minorities. But you've got this very, very white Logan area saying, you know what, it can happen to us. In fact, $4.7 million of our money has been taken from our kids and handed to these charter operators that show no improvement whatsoever, and in a lot of cases, actually worse. And as they pointed out, in Ohio, there are now an additional 400 charter schools. And the grant for $71 million from the Department of Education from Arne Duncan and the federal government has now created this massive boom. It's that influx of cash that goes, here, get started. And, oh, by the way, the public schools will foot the bill. So I think this is the right thing. I think it's smart. I think it's smart to go, okay, you want charter schools and you want to use our money? We're going to bill you for it and then begin the process of suing you for it. Because at the end of the day, you're talking millions of dollars that should be going into educating kids who are in the public schools, not to go, oh, we want some newfangled thing. You want some newfangled thing? Start it off on your own. I look at the York City School District. They wanted to charterize the whole damn thing. You may remember we talked about it for quite some time as the battle was going on. The charter schools there are in big trouble because, the trough of public education money here in Pennsylvania has dried up, because we've got a 100+ day budget problem. That was solved by Pennsylvania State Senator Scott Wagner, who decided that he was going to give the Thaxton Charter School a $400,000 no interest loan. Here you go. Here's the money. Take it. Whenever you want to pay it back, go ahead. Because it's the ideology. But understand, where was Scott Wagner when the Chester Upland School District was working without a paycheck? Because he said, it's not fair. It's not fair that these teachers aren't going to be able to get paid. In fact, his exact quote, Thaxton was faced with tomorrow not making payroll. The bottom line, Scott Wagner said, is that tomorrow the teachers, 70 people, weren't going to get paid for the month. And they'd be owed 2 paychecks. That's not right. So where was he when the Chester Upland teachers worked for 2 months without a paycheck? Where was he? He was nowhere. And you know why? Because he wants to destroy public education for this ideological push towards charters. That's what it's about. And I say, fine. You want to give him $400,000? It's not taxpayer dollars. So I think the Logan Hocking District doing the right thing, and good on them. Let's take a quick break. When we come back and talk a little bit more about the Friedrichs case, what it could do to workers on the ground, and what folks are doing to push back. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. This is another Rick Smith Show.
In 1897, miners at collieries throughout northeastern Pennsylvania's anthracite coal region had enough. Conditions were grueling and life was difficult. Miners were frequently cheated out of pay, overcharged for supplies, some they never wanted or received, forced to live in captive company-owned towns, shop at overpriced company-owned stores, even mandated to use the company doctor since fees were deducted automatically from the miners' pay. This, combined with mine owners forcing longer unpaid hours and the Anti-Immigrant Campbell Act of 1897, taxing mine owners for the use of non-native labor, drove miners to strike. Spontaneously starting in Pennsylvania's Lehigh Valley, workers marched north to get other miners to join in the struggle. Their demands were modest: a 10-cent pay raise and a reduction in the cost of gunpowder. They also wanted the freedom to shop in non-company-owned stores of their choosing and see a doctor not owned by the coal company. As the miners moved northward toward Hazleton, mine owners determined to crush the workers' protest sent their company-paid police force and strikebreakers. Local law enforcement was also on the side of mine owners. Luzerne County Sheriff James Martin, a former mine foreman, deputized 102 local men, arming them with Winchester rifles and sidearms. The group of some 400 miners marching peacefully and unarmed in rows of fours moved onward toward Latimer. Stephen Urich, joining the group outside of Hazleton, taking with him the American flag, shouted, "We have nothing to worry about because we have the American flag to protect us." Within hours and a hail of Winchester bullets, Stephen Urich was gunned down in cold blood, his beloved American flag drenched in his blood and the blood of those who lay murdered and wounded. Eyewitnesses said the sheriff and his hired killers mowed the men down like grass. More than 20 men were murdered on that September day, and more than 50 were wounded, many shot in the back in labor's forgotten massacre. The sheriff and his murderous band were tried for their part in the Latimer massacre and found not guilty of murdering 20 unarmed peaceful demonstrators. Lest we never forget, or as the wife of a miner whose life was stolen from him told her children, "You can forgive, but you can't forget." This Rick Smith Show Labor History Moment was made possible by a grant from the Labor Education Center at IUP. For more information, visit www.thericksmithshow.com.
Yes, it is all about the children, even after they're born. Rick Smith.
I tell you, I'm still loving the fact that Chris Christie was thrown off the Amtrak train. And when I read that at the headline, I had actually hoped that they had physically thrown him off the train, which is kind of mean on my part, I know. But you don't talk on the quiet car. Even he should know that. But just fun, lots of fun. Anyway, let's find out what's going on in the world of bats. And just a minute ago, we talked about this Friedrichs case, which, like I said, an activist Supreme Court justice said, "I want this case." And the moneyed interest said, "Okay, we will comply with you, Mr. Supreme Court Justice, and we will bring you the case that you can screw millions of workers across the country. And you can steal their rights to collectively bargain and to fight for a better life. That's what we will do." And look, at the end of it, when when our democracy in our country is based on what Anthony Scalia is going to say, I worry. But here to talk about what it means to teachers, who are really the focus of this, I think, and really the target of all of this, I've asked Melissa Tomlinson. She's the Badass Teachers Assistant Executive Director, our good friends at the Bats. Melissa, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you, Rick.
So I look at this case, and as we talked about earlier with Bruce Letterman, it seems to me that the court wanted this case, and the wealth class complied.
Yes, I agree, and you have to look at who's going to benefit from the destruction of collective bargaining, and it is the wealthy, the corporations and the business owners that will no longer have to deal as much with pushback from the union when working conditions are not in the best interest of the workers. And in schools, that becomes even more of a concern, because we all know that a teacher's working conditions is a student's working conditions. So if teachers are under duress and there's physical imperfections with their workplace, it just ends up trickling down to our students and to our children, the ones that we're there to protect.
And really, when you look at this, this is an ideological thing. I haven't had anyone make a cogent argument to me at why this is a good thing for workers, for teachers, for society, other than my ideologue friend saying this is, in a very Machiavellian way, gutting our opponent in public.
It is. It seems to me that the teachers' unions have been under attack, extreme attack recently, and it's been because of the draw to the education funding that is available. Our children's futures, that's the best investment that we can make as a country. Yep. We're supposed to better ourselves as a society as a whole, and the way to do that is through education. But unfortunately, when you start bringing in business-based marketing into education, you don't necessarily have the best interests of the children. You have the best interests of profit.
Yeah, the bottom line.
Goes right against what the children need.
And what's interesting is you come from a state where the governor there wants to punch the teachers union right in the nose.
Yeah, he's been known for making those statements. And, you know, I came out very strongly against that statement. I had a real issue with that. The fact is that over 70% of the workforce, teaching workforce in this country is women.
Right.
And when we still don't have equal rights as women, and then a white male comes out with that statement, you really have to question where his intentions lie.
Well, I mean, I think the intentions lie in what I saw last Wednesday night during the debate, and all of this talk of taking us back 100 years to the Lochner era, where we had a desperation class of workers who were voiceless. I mean, that to me seems to be the ultimate goal. And you can throw the case out there, whatever it is, and this Friedrichs one is the next in a long lines of attempts to do just that.
Yes, and you know, I'll tell you something. I had a conversation. I do know somebody that works with President, you know, on the United States marketing campaign, and part of what the future plan is to bring some of the manufacturing back over to this country. They realized what a mistake it was to send a lot of the work overseas. So, in order to do that, you have to create this voiceless working class to get the most profit, to make it profitable for other companies to come back to the United States.
But I don't think we're ever going to go back to the days where you had hundreds of thousands of workers like at Bethlehem Steel that were making steel. I mean, you need this educated workforce. You know, how do you get to that educated workforce? Because today's manufacturing is not what our grandparents did. Today, it's highly computerized, highly technical stuff. How do you get to that educated workforce without educating them?
Right. And, you know, some of the paradigms that we see in education these days, they need to be broken. You know, you have this thought in your mind that children shouldn't have cell phones in the classroom. We need to start embracing this technology that our students and our teachers or our students already know how to use,
right,
and start showing them how to use it for good, for educating themselves, for research. You know, everything wants to be research-based, but we're not allowing the children to have that access to those sources.
Yeah, they got to use that technology for something other than sexting.
Yeah, that would be good.
I mean,
and
honestly,
it's our responsibility to teach them that. They're children. They don't know. We need to show them that.
Yeah, and this is where I think you're right. You know, you need to embrace this technology because sadly, and I don't like it, but it's the world we live in. Information is very cheap. When I was a kid, it was about what you could remember inside this thing on top of your shoulders. Today, you got this little thing in your pocket that, wow, you can get any answer you want.
Exactly.
And I think the skill then becomes filtering and finding out which is appropriate information, which is good, which is bad, and being able to do that in a way that a little critical thinking skill wouldn't hurt.
Exactly. And I know that's what the Common Core promotes is critical thinking skills, but it's still not done in a way that is developmentally appropriate. And we still haven't reached that point, you know, as we just discussed, of where it's implemented correctly and the resources are given to the schools to allow the children to do it correctly.
Right. So let me ask you this, you know, and bringing this back to the Friedrichs case, because I see all of this tied into this case, the ability for teachers to advocate for not just for themselves, but also for their students. I see this case as another one of those obstacles that will be put in the way of teachers being able to do not just their job, but also to advocate for children and for the profession of education. And I got to be honest, I think that's the point.
It is. And I'll give you an example of a very small district in New Jersey right now that is undergoing some changes. And recently they put in a lot of sports fields on their property, and they've made budgetary cuts. They've lost a couple teachers this year. So it was realized that these sports fields needed fences around them. So all of a sudden these fences started going up. Yet when you walk into the building, and one of the buildings, you walk into the computer lab, half the computers in the computer lab are shut down because the technology has not been upgraded. So, at that point, some of the teachers feel the need to start standing up and saying, okay, it's great, the children need sports, we definitely agree with this, but at the same time, we have to look at the true intention of education and what our children deep down need the most in their lives.
Yep. And that comes back down to funding. And I look at what's going on with the charter schools here in Pennsylvania. Anyway, I don't know how it is in New Jersey, but you look at the huge amount of money that's being spent on creating a parallel education system that gets fully funded. They get the money first. We've got a major budget problem going on right here. Over 100 days with no budget, but the charter schools already made whole out of these school districts' budgets.
Yes, I've been following that in Pennsylvania. And, we just got into this discussion in New Jersey. Somebody said Pennsylvania has better support than New Jersey teachers do. And I'm like, wait a minute, you don't know what's going on there. But we have similar issues in New Jersey. The last budget that was passed has this no harm clause to the charter schools. So again, it's like that. The charter schools will get funding at the current 2015-2016 levels, but the public school districts are not getting funding from the state at those levels. They're only getting funding from about a 2008 level.
And exactly the same thing. And the reason I think it's important that people hear this is it's not just happening here in Pennsylvania or here or there in New Jersey. It's happening all across this country. It seems to be the path that's going. In this Friedrichs case, to me, you go back to really doing a harm to teachers being able to get those messages out and fight and advocate for public education.
Right. It's hard to convince a teacher to voice their opinion. They don't realize that they have their own opinion because they're too afraid that it's going to come back and affect them in the workplace. I don't even know how many teachers come up to me and thank me for being vocal and saying what I do say. And usually that's followed by the comment of, I wish I could say the same thing, but I'm too afraid.
Yep. No, I mean, I had the honor of coming out to your Bats Congress in D.C. over the summer and interviewing a bunch of people. And there was one woman that stuck out in my head. She was from Virginia, scared to death that someone might hear her name, hear her voice, and that she would be fired immediately for insubordination and being insolent and, all of these things that you go, no worker should have to suffer that kind of fear.
Right. And we also have to, start thinking about the breakdown that the destruction of collective bargaining rights will do to democracy as a whole. Collective bargaining rights allows the collective voices to reach a majority opinion and have that majority opinion be supported and considered in any kind of argument. So right there, that's a basis of democracy. And without those collective rights, it'll tear away the fabric of democracy.
Let me ask you this, Melissa, because, I have some of my ideological conservative friends who, they tell me about they love states' rights and they want smaller, less intrusive government, get government off my back. But they're all in favor of government bludgeoning workers over the head in this case, because they see unions are a supporter of a lot of Democrats, some Republicans, but mostly Democrats. And they see this as a political opportunity to gore one of their opponents in public. And they seem to be okay with that, even though they do preach the states' rights and smaller government stuff.
Right. And, that's when you have to, each fight belongs in a state. So when we discuss politics and bats, we don't follow those party lines. And we have conversations with both sides of the fence. Yes, it's true. There's more, Democratic candidates and politicians that are in alignment with our thinking, but that doesn't mean we should necessarily negate the Republican viewpoints, and the Republicans should not negate the viewpoints of the Democrats. What it comes down to knowing what is best for the children and siding with that.
Right. But, here's the thing, and this is where it comes down to the arguments on the other side, that if I'm a teacher, I shouldn't have to join a union. I shouldn't have to pay for what I don't want. And I'm curious, what argument do you make back in this? Because I've got my theory on it, but I'm curious yours.
Okay, so when it comes to the unions and teachers, specifically teachers unions in a whole, in my opinion, what I've been able to research and have seen happening is that the teachers unions at the doorway, they kind of stopped protecting what they needed to protect, and that the realization has dawned, and the accountability needs to be taken upon by them to say, hey, you know what? We did kind of veer off from what should be our true course. So, and the group of us and others are working towards bringing that union back to the true course and being more involved with the social justice issues and realizing that, you know, educating children is not just about when those children are in school for the 6-7 hours a day that they're there, that it needs to be a comprehensive, and that we need to work with the communities, work with our cities to develop, you know, back to the almost it takes a village to raise a child mentality.
Right. But, but here's the thing. And this is where the ideological right says, I don't agree with that. I don't want you. I don't need you. I don't need any of this stuff. Why should I have to pay even the fair share dues? Because understand, I do, and I think most people don't get it, that you don't have to join the union. You don't have to, jump in line or do any of that stuff. But you do have to pay a fair share of the representation that you get for the contract that's negotiated, your pay, your benefits, all of those things that they gladly accept. But this would make a free rider system for public sector workers to where you could get all the benefits and not have to pay for it. And look, I'm not the brightest bulb in the box. I gotta think that once that system is in place, those benefits and that pay all fall through the floor.
Right, and we know it takes money to be able to fight back against money. Teachers do not have a lot of income. To lose that collective financial resource of our unions by taking out our dues and kind of breaking down the fabric of them, we'll just put ourselves in worse situations. And
yes.
When you look at states that don't have total collective bargaining rights, you see the amount of bullying that can occur within a district. Right now we have a story that's starting to come to light in Pasco, Florida. Teachers have literally had to go in disguise to discuss what's going on in the school district and how the children are being put in harm.
Wow. And it takes back to the story I told the woman from Virginia. I mean, there's a perfect example of this woman who's just scared to death. And that's what they want. They want fearful workers who are going to comply and walk in line and not move from the company line. But my view on it's been, I've asked my friends at the Chamber of Commerce if I can have their benefits. Because they have some great benefits. In fact, Kevin Spacey was here giving a speech, and I would have loved to have seen Frank Underwood give his speech, but they wanted to charge me full price instead of the chamber rate. And I asked for the chamber rate. They said no. Because I'm not a member. And I said, well, I shouldn't have to pay for it. I want your benefits. I don't want to pay for it.
Right.
And is that right?
No, it's not. It's not. I mean, when we have benefits that are available, we all have to take up the burden of having those benefits applied to all.
Exactly. So let me ask you last line of questioning. I mean, this is an important issue. This Friedrichs case, very important issue that your organization, I understand, filing an amicus brief on kind of telling the story of your group, right?
Yes, it is. It is. It's speaking a lot to collective bargaining and how it's breaking down democracy and how teachers are the last standing guard of the children. And just to destroy the voice that we have is just, I can't even express how much harm's way that'll be putting students in.
Now, I understand this is going to take money. So you guys, are you taking donations to help fight with this? Are you taking up a collection to try and go, hey, we want to have our voice at the court with this?
Yes, actually we are. We just established ourselves as a nonprofit this year, and we do have a PayPal button on our website. It's badassteacher.org. And we are taking donations to be able to file this brief. We just had a great fall fundraiser, and I want to thank everybody that donated to us already. But we look to do more projects like this. So, we do ask continuing donations are a wonderful thing. This brief itself is going to put us, out a couple of $1,000s, and we were very lucky to get some assistance with it from Bruce himself with filing it The regulations just to file paperwork with the Supreme Court are overwhelming just to have to go through all of it, but we're determined to get it done.
And good for you. And thank goodness someone's out there fighting for teachers and students in our public education. And Melissa, I appreciate you taking some time for us, laying it out for us. And we'd love to have you come back again and talk to us pretty soon.
Thank you very much, Rick.
Thanks so much, Melissa Tomlinson. And we'll get a link at thericksmithshow.com. Just click on Melissa's name, take you right there, how you can help out, and maybe send a couple of bucks to help stand up and fight for teachers and public education. Quick break, right back. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Controversial, thought-provoking, opinionated. Rick Smith.
It's evening rush hour in Belgrade, Serbia, and in the city park, over 100 young Afghan men linger on the grass in groups. Several others play a casual game of volleyball. But at 9 p.m., they'll all be gone when buses leave Belgrade for the Croatian border.
At this point of time, it is a pure transit. And most of them, they actually leave the same day when they arrived.
Irina Vojakova Solarano is the UN's resident coordinator in Serbia. The vast majority of asylum seekers spend just 3 days here at most, but their numbers are as staggering as the pace of their movement. Earlier this year, Serbia was receiving only 500 people a month.
Now we have, 7,000 people a day.
Among those waiting for the bus, most have been on the road from Afghanistan for more than 2 months, and aggressive policing, extortion, and a maze of bureaucracy in Bulgaria only heightened the urge to move quickly.
What most of the people need here now, they need shoes. They're always afraid that the one that they have will fall apart and what they will do next.
Vladimir Pocha is the volunteer coordinator at the Asylum Info Center in Belgrade. His volunteers fan out by the hour to city parks and inform new arrivals about the services available to them. Pocha, like many of the volunteers, is a student of psychology, and while even 3 days is too little time to begin sorting through the traumas many asylum seekers have faced, he thinks some added sensitivity and social skills, a little persistence even, go a long way in offering effective support.
I'm good. That's the answer that most of the people give us at first contact. But then after you offer something, it clicks that they can get something here. Because if we ask them what they need, they sort of think that they're making a problem if they ask for something.
In Belgrade, Serbia today and Croatia tomorrow, I'm Luke Vargas with the Talk Radio News Service.
These are words you should tell the truth. Your language, and now we got the proof. Where you gonna run to? Where you gonna hide? You're running for the door now. No one's getting out alive.
Tomorrow, the big day. I hope it's on the calendar. I hope it's on the plans for tomorrow. Wake up, go to the polls, cast your ballot, have your say. Be part of the democratic process. One of those things ingrained in me at a very young age. Could not wait when I turned 18 to cast my ballot, to have my say, and then the American right to complain. Because then, yes, I can go and I can complain with everyone else. But tomorrow, big day. And, the choices are pretty clear. I mean, I look at the Supreme Court justices. That's the big race in my view. That's going to be the big one. And you look at, and you look at the folks that are running. I'm still stuck on the Republican who the Bar Association rated as not recommended. Stay away. Bad. And yet she's going to get, thousands of votes. That's what scares me, because you got a bunch of lever pullers. That are not, it is what it is. Anyway, I want everybody to go out to vote tomorrow. That's what we got to do. I would like to see 40% participation. And I would like to see where at the end of the rainbow where you find the pot of gold, but 40%, I think 40% of the voters get out tomorrow. That would be a good turnout. So we'll be back once we know who the winners are. And I'm looking forward to the big voting day, as I know you are too. If you missed any portion of the program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast, the Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go. And as always, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks to our guests. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
It's coming like the tide of flood beneath the lunar sway. Imperial, mysterious, in amorous array. Democracy is coming to the USA.